Hi guys, and welcome to Gentle History for Deep Sleep Tonight. You arrive just a little too late. A thin layer of ash drifts slowly through the air, settling softly on your shoulders, light as snow but warmer than it should be. You brush it away without thinking, only to notice how quiet everything is. No footsteps, no distant voices, not even the sound of a wind. Just a stillness that feels unnatural. You take a slow breath, and there is a faint, bitter taste in the air. It lingers longer than expected. You pause, because something here does not quite make sense, and the more you notice, the clearer it becomes. If you were truly standing here, you would not have time to understand it. You probably would not survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to share your location and local time in the comments. I always enjoy seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Flow straight into the story. The ash swirling around you is not from a disaster unfolding nearby. Not tonight. Instead, it drifts from a distant prairie fire that burned weeks ago, carried hundreds of miles by unpredictable winds across the vast interior of North America. You stand beside a wagon trail in the year 1852. Ahead stretches a long line of covered wagons. Behind stretches another. The road seems endless. The people around you are emigrants heading west toward Oregon. Some hope for farmland, others seek opportunity. A few simply want a fresh beginning far from crowded eastern towns. You fall into step beside one family moving steadily through the dusty landscape. The father walks near the oxen. The mother rides occasionally but spends much of the day managing children, supplies, and countless small problems. 3 young children move between wagon and trail with energy that would probably exhaust modern adults before breakfast. The youngest carries a stick that has somehow become both sword and fishing pole. You suspect it may later become a horse. Children on the Oregon Trail possessed remarkable imagination because manufactured toys occupied very little wagon space. Every pound mattered. A widely accepted historical fact is that emigrants were advised to carry only essential possessions because overloaded wagons often broke down or slowed dangerously during the journey west. You glance at the wagon. Nothing about it looks luxurious. Canvas stretches over wooden bows. Barrels and crates fill every available corner. Clothing, flour, tools, bedding, cooking equipment, spare wagon parts, and family treasures all compete for room. The wagon resembles a moving house squeezed into the dimensions of a large closet, and somehow people lived from it for months. The afternoon feels unusually cool. Summer should still hold firm, yet the breeze carries hints of autumn. You notice several travelers discussing the sky. They keep glancing west, not because they expect immediate danger, because weather always matters. A storm in the wrong place can delay progress for days. An early winter can create far greater problems. You continue walking. The trail rolls across open grasslands beneath an enormous sky. Clouds drift lazily overhead. Oxen pull steadily. Wheels creak. Leather harnesses groan softly. The rhythm becomes almost hypnotic. Hours pass this way, one slow mile after another. One historian described trail travel as a mixture of endless motion and endless waiting. That sounds contradictory until you experience it yourself. You are always moving. Yet destinations seem forever distant. As evening approaches, the wagon train begins searching for camp. Water matters. Grass for animals matters. Shelter from wind matters. Finding all 3 at once feels almost like winning a frontier lottery. The family you accompany settles near a shallow creek. Soon dozens of small camps appear across the prairie. Fires flicker, voices rise, cooking begins. The smell reaches you almost immediately. Coffee, salt pork, beans, fresh bread if a family has been especially fortunate. Dinner on the trail rarely wins culinary awards. Still, after walking for hours, almost anything tastes wonderful. You sit beside the fire while twilight spreads across the horizon. The children finally stop running, at least temporarily. Their mother distributes food while carefully guarding supplies. Every meal requires planning. Every pound consumed today cannot be eaten later. A lesser-known frontier curiosity is that some emigrants carried pickles specifically because they believed the vinegar helped prevent illness during long journeys. Whether it worked remains uncertain, but people often trusted practical remedies passed between generations. Nearby, older travelers exchange stories. One man insists winter will arrive early. Another dismisses the idea entirely. A third claims he can predict weather from cloud shapes. His confidence greatly exceeds his scientific accuracy. You listen quietly. No one truly knows what lies ahead. That uncertainty defines trail life. Maps exist. Guidebooks exist. Advice exists. Yet conditions change constantly. The West remains vast enough to surprise everyone. The fire crackles. Stars emerge, the prairie darkens. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote begins calling. Another answers, then another. The sound drifts across the grasslands like a conversation carried on the night air. The youngest child moves closer to the adults. Suddenly, the wilderness feels larger than it did in daylight. You cannot really blame him. It feels larger to you as well. The Oregon Trail of 1852 represents one of the busiest migration years in American history. Thousands of emigrants moved westward that season, yet despite the numbers, the landscape often felt astonishingly empty. A person could walk a short distance from camp and feel completely alone beneath the stars. You stare upward. The sky seems endless. Modern electric lights do not exist here to soften the darkness. The Milky Way stretches overhead with startling clarity. For a moment, everything feels peaceful, comfortable, safe. Then the wind shifts, just slightly. You notice it because the fire changes direction. So do several experienced travelers. Conversations pause, eyes lift toward the horizon. Nothing dramatic appears. No storm clouds, no thunder. Only a subtle change. Yet people accustomed to outdoor life often notice small differences long before others do. The father of the family studies the western sky for several seconds. Then he quietly checks the wagon. Not urgently, not fearfully, just carefully. You help secure a loose blanket. A barrel receives an extra rope. A few supplies are repositioned. Simple precautions, nothing more. Still, you find yourself glancing west as well. The air feels different now, cooler, sharper. As darkness deepens, camp slowly settles, fires shrink, voices fade, children fall asleep, animals shift occasionally in the shadows. The wagon train seems calm, almost sleepy, yet beneath that calm runs a quiet awareness. Winter is somewhere out there, perhaps distant, perhaps not. The people around you understand something modern travelers often forget. Nature does not negotiate. Storms do not care about schedules. Snow does not respect optimism. And on a journey stretching more than 2,000 miles, preparation often matters more than courage. You pull a blanket tighter around your shoulders. The stars shine overhead. The prairie stretches endlessly into darkness. The wagons rest. The families sleep. And somewhere beyond the western horizon, unseen tonight but steadily approaching, the first real test of the journey is beginning to gather. Morning arrives gradually. At first, you notice only a faint silver glow spreading across the eastern horizon. Then shapes begin emerging from darkness. Wagons appear one by one. Campfires become circles of orange light. Frost sparkles across the prairie grass. The air feels colder than yesterday, not dramatically colder, just enough for people to notice. You rise from your blanket and stretch carefully. Every muscle reminds you that sleeping outdoors in the 19th century lacks many features advertised by modern mattress companies. Nearby, the family is already awake. The father checks the oxen. The mother starts breakfast. The children slowly emerge from blankets like cautious groundhogs examining uncertain weather conditions. Soon coffee boils over the face as rich smell drifts through camp. Many emigrants considered coffee almost as essential as flour. It provided warmth, comfort, and perhaps most importantly, a sense of normality in a world constantly changing around them. You accept a tin cup. The warmth spreads through your hands. For a few minutes, everything feels peaceful. Then the work begins. Because life on the Oregon Trail never pauses for long. Breakfast must be prepared. Animals must be fed. Wagons must be loaded. Camp must disappear. Within an hour, the quiet settlement that filled this patch of prairie transforms back into a moving caravan. One of the remarkable realities of trail travel is how quickly entire communities could appear and vanish. A campsite holding hundreds of people at night might leave little evidence by noon except flattened grass and cold ashes. The wagons begin rolling once more. Wood creaks, harness chains rattle softly. Oxen lean into their collars. Dust rises beneath countless wheels. You fall into step beside the family again. The road stretches westward across open country. Sometimes it barely looks like a road at all. In many places, the Oregon Trail resembles a collection of parallel tracks spreading across the landscape. Thousands of wagons gradually widen the route year after year. The result looks less like a highway and more like a broad scar across the prairie. The father points toward his several distant ruts. Older trail. You nod. Some tracks may have been created years earlier, others perhaps only weeks ago. The land remembers travelers long after they pass. Hours drift by. The rhythm becomes familiar. Walk. Rest. Walk again. Adjust supplies. Check animals. Continue west. Modern travelers often imagine emigrants riding comfortably inside wagons. The reality was rather different. A well-established historical fact is that most adults walked much of the journey because wagons was crowded with supplies and rough terrain made riding uncomfortable. You glance inside the wagon. The interior resembles a storage room bouncing across uneven ground. After 5 minutes in there, walking begins to seem like an excellent alternative. The children alternate between riding and walking. The youngest eventually discovers a grasshopper. For the next 20 minutes, the grasshopper becomes the most fascinating creature in North America. You admire his commitment to the subject. By late morning, the landscape begins changing. Gentle hills replace some of the flat prairie. The grass grows shorter. The sky seems somehow larger, if that sounds impossible. Spend enough time in the American West and you may understand. Distances behave differently here. A hill that appears nearby might require hours to reach. A cloud can cast a shadow stretching for miles. The sheer scale of everything feels difficult to describe. You stop briefly near a shallow stream. Animals drink eagerly. People refill water containers. The pause allows conversations to develop. Several emigrants discuss conditions farther west. Stories move quickly along the trail. Some prove accurate, others become less reliable with each retelling. One traveler claims heavy snow already blankets distant mountain passes. Another insists conditions remain excellent. A third reports hearing entirely different information. No one knows which version is correct. Such uncertainty follows emigrants everywhere. News travels slowly. Weather changes rapidly. The future remains hidden beyond the horizon. A curious frontier tidbit occasionally appears in emigrant diaries. Some travellers carried live chickens inside wagons for fresh eggs during the journey. Maintaining poultry while crossing thousands of miles of wilderness sounds surprisingly complicated, yet many families attempted it anyway. You imagine explaining this arrangement to a modern airline passenger. The conversation would likely be memorable. The march resumes. The sun climbs higher. Dust coats boots. Faces grow warm. Despite the cool morning, afternoon feels pleasant, almost comfortable. That comfort creates its own danger. Good weather encourages optimism. Optimism encourages carelessness. Experienced travellers understand this. You notice older emigrants constantly checking equipment. A loose wheel bolt receives attention. A torn strap gets repaired immediately. Small problems become large problems if ignored. The mother mends clothing while walking. You are impressed. She somehow sews, supervises children, watches supplies, and keeps pace with the wagon train simultaneously. Frontier families developed astonishing efficiency. They had little choice. Every task competed for limited time. As afternoon drifts onward, you begin noticing subtle signs of approaching autumn. The breeze carries a cooler edge. Certain plants have already begun fading. Migrating birds occasionally pass overhead. Nature seems to be preparing for change, whether people are ready or not. You hear a discussion among several older men riding nearby. One points toward distant cloud formations. Another studies wind direction. Their conversation resembles amateur meteorology, mixed with personal experience and educated guessing. Interestingly, scholars continue discussing how much practical weather prediction knowledge emigrants truly possessed, compared with how much they believed they possessed. Experience certainly helped, yet nature retained plenty of surprises. You remember the shifting wind from the previous evening. Perhaps they do too. The day slowly approaches its end. Long shadows stretch across the trail. The wagon train begins seeking another campsite. This process occurs every evening, yet it never becomes entirely routine. Water sources vary. Grass conditions change. Safety concerns differ from place to place. Choosing where to stop requires constant judgment. Eventually, a suitable location appears. The wagons circle loosely near a creek lined with scattered cottonwood trees. The sight of trees feels strangely exciting after hours of open prairie. Children rush toward them immediately. Adults follow more cautiously. Trees mean firewood. Firewood means warmth. Warmth means comfort. Comfort is never taken for granted here. Soon camp takes shape once again. Fires appear. Cooking begins. Animals graze nearby. Voices mingle with the soft sounds of evening. The family prepares a simple meal. Beans, bread, coffee, a little salt pork. Nothing extravagant. Yet the smell drifting from the cook fire feels deeply satisfying. You sit nearby as twilight settles across the camp. The father studies the sky again. Not anxiously, just attentively. You find yourself doing the same. Clouds gather in the far distance, thin at first, barely noticeable. Still, they seem more organized than yesterday. The wind feels different too, subtle, persistent, almost thoughtful. Around another fire, someone plays a fiddle. The music drifts softly through camp. Children laugh. Dogs bark occasionally. For a moment, the wagon train resembles a travelling village, a temporary community carried westward across an immense continent. You look around at the faces illuminated by firelight. Farmers, carpenters, labourers, merchants, families seeking futures they cannot yet see. Each wagon carries hopes as carefully as supplies. Each traveller balances confidence against uncertainty. And somewhere beyond the darkening horizon, hidden behind distance and time, the weather continues writing plans of its own. The stars emerge one by one. The music fades. Conversations soften. Another day on the Oregon Trail comes quietly to an end, yet the warnings remain subtle but unmistakable. The season is changing. The road is growing harder, and the mountains waiting ahead care very little about human schedules. The following morning arrives beneath a sky that seems uncertain about its intentions. Sunlight appears, but only in fragments. Thin grey clouds drift overhead, breaking apart and gathering again as if engaged in some slow conversation beyond human hearing. You rise from your blanket and immediately notice the wind. Not strong, not threatening, just steady. The sort of wind that never seems to stop. The father notices it too. So do several other experienced travellers. You can always identify the people who have spent years outdoors. They rarely stare at weather dramatically. Instead, they glance at it the way a carpenter examines wood or a sailor studies a rope. Quietly, carefully, respectfully. Breakfast unfolds with familiar efficiency. Coffee steams in tin cups. Bread warms near the fire. Children wake slowly. Oxen chew methodically. The wagon train prepares itself for another day on the long western road, yet something feels different. The conversations seem more focused, the laughter a little softer. People continue discussing weather, not because they enjoy worrying, because weather may soon become the most important subject available. The wagons begin moving shortly after sunrise. You walk alongside the family as the trail gradually climbs toward a rougher country. The endless prairie is beginning to change. The land rolls more noticeably now. Rocky outcrops appear. Distant ridges interrupt the horizon. The mountains remain far away, yet their influence already reaches this place. The air feels cooler. The nights grow colder. Winter seems less like an abstract future, and more like a traveller approaching from the opposite direction. Late in the morning, excitement spreads through the wagon train. A small group of riders approaches from the west. Travellers returning east always attract attention. They bring information, news, rumours, warnings, sometimes all three at once. The riders appear dusty and tired. Their horses move with the weary confidence of animals that have covered many miles. Soon conversations break out across the trail. Questions fly from every direction. How are the rivers? How are the roads? What conditions lie ahead? Have there been storms? The answers vary. Some sound encouraging, others less so. One rider reports unusually cold weather in higher elevations. Another mentions early snowfall in distant mountain areas. Nothing catastrophic, nothing certain. Still, the words linger. The father listens carefully. You can see him weighing each piece of information. Experience has taught him that frontier news often arrives incomplete, yet ignoring warnings entirely would be foolish. A commonly accepted historical reality is that emigrants depended heavily on information exchange between travellers because reliable communication networks barely existed across much of the western frontier. In many cases, a passing rider represented the closest thing available to a news service. The wagon train continues forward. Around midday, you encounter another source of information. A small trading party appears near a stream crossing. The men know the region well. Their lives depend upon understanding local conditions. Several emigrants gather around them. Maps emerge. Questions multiply. One trader points westward. His expression grows serious. Snow, he says. Not here, not yet, but farther ahead. The words spread through camp during the afternoon like ripples crossing water. Snow. The word itself feels strange beneath a sky that still carries traces of summer. Yet everyone understands how quickly conditions can change, particularly near mountains. You walk for hours while considering that reality. The trail seems peaceful enough. Grass waves in the breeze, birds circle overhead, sunlight occasionally breaks through clouds. Nothing about the landscape suggests danger. Then again, danger rarely announces itself with courtesy. The youngest child has discovered a new fascination: cloud watching. Every passing shape becomes an animal, a ship, a castle. At one point he identifies a cloud as a giant potato. You admire his creative confidence. No one else sees the potato, but no one argues either. During a brief afternoon stop, you hear an unusual story from an older emigrant. He claims that years earlier a wagon train carried an entire beehive westward. Whether the tale is perfectly accurate remains uncertain. Still, several frontier accounts describe settlers transporting bees across great distances because pollination and honey were considered valuable resources. The image of bees crossing the continent inside a covered wagon feels wonderfully absurd. Yet frontier life often balanced practicality with surprising ingenuity. The journey resumes. Hours pass. The wind remains steady, perhaps a little colder now. You pull your coat tighter, others do the same. Nobody comments on it. Nobody needs to. The change speaks for itself. By late afternoon, the wagon train reaches a broad rise overlooking miles of countryside. The view is extraordinary. Rolling grasslands stretch toward distant hills. Cloud shadows drift across the landscape. Far beyond them, barely visible against the horizon, lie faint blue shapes. Mountains, not close, not immediate, yet undeniably present. Everyone stops to look. The mountains represent both goal and obstacle, promise and danger, opportunity and uncertainty. You study them for several moments. Beautiful from this distance. Less comforting when you remember the stories of snow. Nearby, two travellers debate the situation. One believes the reports are exaggerated. The other is unconvinced. Such disagreements appear everywhere along the trail. Researchers continue debating how accurately emigrants interpreted environmental warnings compared with how often optimism influenced their decisions. Human nature has not changed much. People often prefer favourable predictions, particularly when difficult choices depend upon them. As evening approaches, the wagon train settles beside a grove of trees. The location offers water, fuel, and modest shelter from wind. It feels like a fortunate discovery. Camp comes alive with familiar routines. Animals attended, meals prepared. Children wash reluctantly. The reluctance seems universal across centuries. You help gather firewood. The task becomes surprisingly pleasant. The scent of dry wood fills the air. Leaves rustle overhead. For a brief time, the coming challenges seem distant. Dinner unfolds around glowing fires. Stories circulate. News from the traders receives constant discussion. Some families consider increasing their pace. Others argue for caution. Everyone understands the basic problem. Moving faster risks exhaustion. Moving slower risks weather. Neither option feels perfect. Darkness settles gradually. The sky remains hidden behind shifting clouds. Only occasional stars appear. The wind continues moving through the trees. Soft, persistent, restless. The father finishes checking the wagon. Every rope receives inspection. Every wheel gets examined. Every important supply is accounted for. You notice other families doing exactly the same thing. Preparation becomes almost contagious. One careful traveller inspires another. A forgotten strap gets tightened. A loose crate gets secured. A blanket gets moved closer at hand. Small actions, perhaps important actions. The camp eventually grows quiet. Children sleep. Conversations fade, the fires shrink into glowing embers. You sit for a moment watching sparks drift upward into darkness. The mountains remain invisible now, hidden beyond the night, yet their presence feels stronger than ever. The warnings from riders, the advice from traders, the colder wind, the changing season. Individually, each sign seems minor. Together, they form a pattern. And as you settle beneath your blankets and listen to the wind moving through distant branches, you begin to understand that the journey is entering a new chapter. The road ahead is no longer merely long, it is becoming unpredictable, and somewhere beyond those shadowed mountains, winter is already waiting. The next morning begins with urgency, not panic, not fear, just the quiet realization that time suddenly matters more than it did before. You notice it almost immediately. People wake earlier. Breakfast conversations feel shorter. Wagons are packed with unusual efficiency. Nobody has received terrible news overnight. Nobody has seen an approaching blizzard. Yet the reports from traders and eastbound travelers have settled into everyone's thoughts. The mountains no longer feel distant. The season no longer feels patient. You stand beside the family as dawn paints the horizon with pale gold. The air bites at your cheeks. A week ago, this temperature might have felt refreshing. Today it feels like a reminder. The father finishes his coffee quickly. The mother wraps an extra shawl around her shoulders. Even the children seem slightly subdued, at least for the first 10 minutes of the day. Soon enough, the youngest discovers a particularly interesting rock and returns to his normal level of enthusiasm. The wagon train moves out earlier than usual. Wheels begin turning while traces of morning frost still cling to the grass. The sound becomes familiar, wood creaking, oxen breathing, boots crunching across hard ground, a moving community carrying everything it owns toward an uncertain future. You walk beside the wagon and notice the pace. Definitely faster, not dramatically so. Nobody is racing, yet fewer stops occur. Breaks seem shorter. People spend less time lingering beside streams or admiring distant scenery. The trail has become a task, a destination to reach. According to many emigrant journals, wagon companies often adjusted their speed based on weather concerns, river conditions, and the approach of winter. Progress was never measured simply in miles. It was measured in opportunity. Opportunity to cross a pass, opportunity to avoid a storm, opportunity to reach safety before circumstances changed. As the morning progresses, the landscape continues transforming. The open prairie of earlier weeks is gradually giving way to rougher country. Low ridges rise and fall ahead. Rocky ground appears more frequently. The distant mountains seem larger each day. You suspect they're growing mostly because you are getting closer. Still, they possess an almost magical quality. No matter how many hours you walk toward them, they continue dominating the horizon. Around midday, the wagon train encounters another group heading east. These travelers appear tired, not exhausted, just worn by experience. Their clothing carries dust from hundreds of miles. Their wagons show signs of constant use. Naturally, everyone wants information. Questions begin immediately. What lies ahead? How are the roads? What about the weather? The answers are mixed. One man describes cold nights in the higher country. A woman mentioned seeing frost every morning for nearly a week. Another traveller recalls light snow falling briefly at elevation before melting away. That last detail attracts considerable attention. Snow. Not a rumour this time. An observation. A memory. Something actually witnessed. Nobody says much afterward. People simply nod and absorb the information. The wagon train resumes moving. The pace remains steady, purposeful, You begin noticing how carefully emigrants watch their animals. Oxen represent far more than transportation. Without healthy animals, progress slows dramatically. Without progress, winter gains ground. Every member of the wagon train understands this relationship. The animals are fed first, protected carefully, monitored constantly. A strange but fascinating historical detail occasionally appears in trail accounts. Some emigrants fashioned protective footwear for valuable livestock when terrain became especially difficult. Frontier solutions often looked unusual, but necessity encouraged creativity. You imagine an ox wearing improvised shoes. The image remains surprisingly charming. The afternoon stretches onward beneath shifting clouds. Sunlight appears and disappears. Wind sweeps across the hills. The temperature fluctuates just enough to keep everyone reaching for coats and then removing them again. Nature seems unable to make up its mind. You climb a rise and pause briefly to look back. The wagon train extends across the landscape like a moving ribbon. White canvas tops catch the sunlight. Tiny figures walk beside them. From this distance, the entire migration appears fragile. A handful of people crossing an enormous continent, and yet thousands succeeded. That thought feels encouraging. The journey remains difficult, but difficult does not mean impossible. Later in the afternoon, you overhear a discussion among several older emigrants. They debate how much risk remains ahead. One believes the weather warnings are being exaggerated. Another disagrees. A third argues that caution costs little compared with overconfidence. Researchers continue examining how emigrants balance conflicting information while making decisions on the trail. Human judgment remains difficult to reconstruct because every family viewed risk through its own experiences and priorities. The conversation ends without resolution. Most frontier debates probably did. The future rarely provides advance confirmation. As evening approaches, clouds thicken noticeably. Nothing threatening, just heavier, lower. The sunlight becomes softer. The colours of the landscape shift toward grey and gold. You feel the temperature dropping once again. Others notice too. Several people button coats. Children pull blankets around themselves while riding. The wind carries a faint smell of moisture. Camp is established beside a small creek bordered by cottonwoods. The location offers decent protection. Not perfect. Good enough. That phrase describes many aspects of frontier life. Good enough water. Good enough shelter. Good enough weather. Perfection rarely participates, and you help gather firewood before darkness falls. The task proves more difficult than expected. Dry wood is available, but not in endless quantities. Every armful matters. Every branch collected tonight becomes warmth later. By now, many emigrants think automatically about such things: fuel, food, water, distance, the practical arithmetic of survival. Dinner unfolds beneath a darkening sky. The meal is simple, the company comforting. Around the campfires, stories begin circulating once more. One older traveller recalls a storm encountered years earlier. Another insists it was not nearly as severe as people remember. Memory has a way of competing with itself. The children listen with wide eyes. Adults listen with quieter expressions. Nobody wants frightening stories. Everyone wants useful lessons. After supper, you notice increased activity around the wagons. Extra ropes are checked. Canvas coverings inspected. Supplies rearranged. Nothing dramatic, just preparation. The father spends nearly half an hour ensuring important items remain protected from possible moisture. Flour, blankets, tools, dry clothing. The sort of objects that become priceless during bad weather. A scholarly discussion that still continues today centers on how much trail success depended upon planning versus luck. Most likely, both played important roles. Preparation improved survival odds. Fortune often decided the rest. Night settles slowly. The clouds hide most of the stars. The wind whispers through the trees. Campfires glow warmly across the darkness. You sit quietly, watching sparks rise into the night. The mountains remain invisible beyond the horizon, yet they seem closer than ever. The reports of frost, the stories of snow, the cooler air, the hurried pace. Together they create a growing sense of momentum. The wagon train is no longer simply travelling west. It is trying to stay ahead of something, not an enemy, not a rival, a season, a force older than every wagon, every trail, and every dream carried toward Oregon. And as you settle beneath your blankets and listen to the restless wind moving through the cottonwoods, you cannot shake the feeling that winter has finally noticed the travelers crossing its path. By the following afternoon, the sky has become impossible to ignore, not because it looks dramatic, quite the opposite. It looks restrained, quiet, watchful. A pale blanket of cloud stretches from horizon to horizon, softening the sunlight and draining some of the colour from the landscape. You have spent enough days outdoors now to understand why experienced travellers keep studying it. Weather does not always arrive with a grand announcement. Sometimes it arrives politely, then stays much longer than invited. The wagon train moves steadily through rolling country. The pace remains purposeful. Nobody speaks openly about racing winter anymore. There is no need. The faster walking, the shorter breaks, the constant attention to conditions. All of it reveals the same truth. People are concerned. As afternoon advances, leaders of several wagon groups begin discussing where to stop for the night. The conversation receives more attention than usual. Choosing a campsite suddenly feels important. Very important. A poor location might expose families to wind. A poor location might offer little firewood. A poor location might become miserable if weather deteriorates. You follow the family as they approach a broad valley bordered by low hills. A creek winds through the centre. Scattered trees stand near the water. Grass remains available for animals. The location is not perfect, but it is good, and good campsites are not always guaranteed. The decision is made. Tonight, the wagon train will stop here. Almost immediately, activity begins. The relaxed pace often associated with evening camp disappears. People work with noticeable determination. You help unhitch oxen. Others gather wood. Children collect smaller branches. Water containers are filled. Meals are prepared. Every task unfolds with efficiency born from repetition. Months on the trail have transformed ordinary families into skilled outdoor communities. One particularly interesting reality of the Oregon Trail is that many emigrants had little wilderness experience before departure. Yet necessity forced rapid learning. Families who began the journey as farmers, merchants, or labourers often became surprisingly capable camp managers by the time they reached the Western Territories. You see evidence of that transformation everywhere. The father immediately examines the ground around the wagon. He studies drainage, wind direction, nearby shelter. The mother organizes blankets and clothing. The children help gather fuel. Even the youngest contributes a handful of sticks with enormous seriousness. You suspect the contribution contains more enthusiasm than practical value. Still, nobody discourages him. Every effort matters. The afternoon light slowly fades. The temperature drops noticeably. The wind strengthens. Not enough to alarm anyone. Enough to attract attention. You carry another armload of wood toward the growing pile near camp. The stack has become impressive. Several neighbouring families are doing exactly the same thing. Fuel represents security. People understand this instinctively. A fire provides more than warmth. It provides comfort, light, confidence. The reassuring sense that darkness remains outside a circle you control. Near the creek, animals graze while there is still daylight. You notice how carefully they are monitored. Oxen lower their heads and eat steadily. Horses shift and snort occasionally. Every animal seems aware of the changing weather in its own way, perhaps more aware than humans. Some naturalists have suggested that livestock often reacted to approaching storms before people noticed obvious atmospheric changes. Whether this occurred consistently remains uncertain, but frontier diaries occasionally mention unusual animal behavior before severe weather. You watch one horse repeatedly lift its head toward the north. Perhaps it smells something. Perhaps it hears something. Or perhaps it simply dislikes being a horse in a historical anecdote. As dusk approaches, camp takes on a different atmosphere. Fewer people wander, more remain close to their wagons. Conversations revolve around practical matters, blankets, food supplies, routes ahead. The father decides to add extra ropes securing the wagon cover. You help tighten them. The canvas pulls taut. The structure suddenly looks more solid, more prepared. Nearby, other families do the same. One wagon owner reinforces a weak section with spare boards. Another adjusts cargo placement to keep important supplies dry. Preparation spreads through camp like a quiet chain reaction. One family sees another making improvements and decides to improve something too. Before long, nearly everyone is checking equipment. A peculiar story circulates around one campfire. Years earlier, according to an elderly traveller, a wagon company reportedly carried an enormous grandfather clock across part of the trail before eventually abandoning it when conditions became difficult. Whether every detail of the story is true remains impossible to know. Yet emigrant accounts contain countless examples of cherished possessions being discarded along the route. Sentimental value often lost its argument when weighed against practical necessity. The image of a clock sitting alone beside the trail somehow feels both funny and slightly sad. Darkness arrives. The valley fills with firelight. Orange flames flicker beneath the grey sky. The smell of wood smoke drifts through the camp. Dinner begins. Simple food. Warm food. Exactly what everyone wants. You sit near the family as they eat. The children seem tired tonight. Not unhappy. Just worn from travel. The youngest nearly falls asleep while holding a piece of bread. His mother gently guides him toward blankets. The transition requires remarkably little persuasion. A rare frontier miracle. As the evening deepens, the wind continues growing stronger. Still not dangerous. Still not alarming. Yet increasingly difficult to ignore. You hear it moving through the trees. A low, restless sound, like distant water, or distant voices. The father glances upward repeatedly. Others do the same. No one appears frightened. They simply understand the importance of paying attention. Historical researchers continue debating how accurately 19th century emigrants could distinguish between ordinary weather shifts and signs of severe storms. Much depended upon experience, local knowledge, and simple observation. Whatever the case, nobody here seems interested in gambling unnecessarily. Before sleep, final preparations begin. Extra blankets are brought closer. Boots are positioned carefully. Important supplies remain accessible. Firewood is stacked where it can be reached quickly. The wagon becomes both home and emergency shelter. You help secure one final rope, then step back to examine the camp. The valley glows softly beneath scattered fires. Families settle into place. Animals rest nearby. The creek murmurs through darkness. For a moment, everything seems peaceful, comfortable, safe. Yet beneath that calm lies anticipation. The feeling before an important event begins. Not dread, not panic, awareness. The wind slides across the valley once more. Cooler now, sharper. You wrap your blanket around your shoulders and stare into the darkness beyond the campfires. The hills stand as shadowy shapes beneath the clouds. The stars remain hidden. The air feels heavy with possibility, and as families drift towards sleep, surrounded by wagons, wood smoke, and carefully gathered supplies, you cannot help noticing that everyone has prepared a little more thoroughly than usual, just in case. Because on the Oregon Trail, survival often depended upon respecting possibilities before they became realities. Tonight, every rope is tightened, every blanket is ready, every firewood pile stands waiting, and somewhere beyond the dark hills, the weather is finally making up its mind. Night settles across the valley with unusual speed. One moment the hills remain visible beneath a dim grey sky. The next, darkness seems to pour into every corner of the landscape. The campfires become brighter as the world beyond them disappears. You sit beside the flames, holding your hands toward the warmth. The fire crackles softly. Smoke drifts sideways in the wind. The smell of burning cottonwood hangs in the air. Around you, families prepare for sleep, not leisurely, deliberately. The temperature is dropping faster than it has on previous nights. Everyone can feel it. No thermometer is necessary. The cold announces itself through stiff fingers, reddened cheeks, and breath that lingers visibly in the air. The father adds another piece of wood to the fire. Nearby, several other camps do the same. Nobody wants to waste fuel, yet nobody wants the fire dying too soon either. Like many aspects of trail life, warmth becomes a matter of balance. You glance toward the sky. Still no stars. Clouds stretch overhead like a heavy blanket. The wind moves continuously through the trees bordering the creek. The sound is strangely soothing. A low rushing murmur. Steady. Endless. The children have already disappeared beneath layers of blankets. The youngest is asleep almost instantly. You envy him slightly. Children possess a remarkable ability to ignore uncertainty when they are tired enough. Adults are less fortunate. Many remain awake around the fires, talking quietly, watching the weather, thinking. One widely recognized historical reality is that emigrants often slept outdoors, beneath wagons, inside wagons, or under simple shelters depending on weather and available space. The romantic image of comfortably sleeping inside covered wagons rarely matched reality. You understand why. The wagon beside you contains supplies, equipment, and precious cargo. Human comfort ranks surprisingly low on the list. Tonight, most people will rely on blankets, determination, and whatever warmth they can preserve. Eventually, you settle into your own bedding. The ground feels hard, not unbearable, just relentlessly honest. No amount of optimism transforms dirt into a feather mattress. You pull blankets higher. The cold immediately searches for every opening, a gap near your neck, a space near your boots, a fold along your shoulder. Winter seems remarkably talented at finding weaknesses. For a while, sleep refuses to arrive. The camp remains active. You hear quiet voices, a horse shifting nearby, the occasional bark of a distant dog, the rustle of canvas, the snap of burning wood. Gradually, however, those sounds diminish, one by one. Conversations end. The fires shrink. Darkness deepens. Only the wind remains constant. Hours pass. You drift between sleeping and waking. The cold becomes part of every dream, part of every thought. When you open your eyes again, the camp appears transformed. Moonlight filters weakly through the clouds. Silver frost covers the ground. The air feels significantly colder. Your breath emerges in pale clouds. Nearby fires have dwindled to glowing embers. A few figures move quietly through the darkness. People checking animals, adding wood, making certain everything remains secure. Frontier nights rarely allow complete relaxation. A small concern always requires attention. A curious historical anecdote appears in several trail accounts. Some emigrants heated stones near campfires before wrapping them in cloth and placing them beneath blankets to provide temporary warmth during cold nights. The idea sounds wonderfully practical. You suspect anyone sleeping in this valley tonight would approve. The wind strengthens slightly, not dramatically, just enough to make canvas coverings flutter. You hear ropes creak, branches sway. The sound travels across the camp like distant surf. For a moment, you simply listen. There is something strangely beautiful about it. The wilderness possesses its own music, not always comforting, not always gentle, but undeniably memorable. A figure approaches one of the fires. It is the father. He kneels beside the embers and carefully coaxes the flames back to life. Soon a small circle of orange light glows against the darkness. You watch him for a moment. Then several others emerge from blankets as well. The cold has become impossible to ignore. A few people gather quietly around the renewed fire. Nobody speaks loudly. The hour discourages unnecessary conversation. Instead, people sit together, sharing warmth, sharing company. Sometimes companionship serves as its own form of insulation. You accept a cup of warm coffee. The heat feels miraculous. Simple, ordinary, miraculous. The liquid warms your hands first, then your chest, then your mood. Civilization occasionally reduces itself to a hot drink on a cold night. You stare into the flames. The sparks rise upward and vanish into darkness. Beyond the firelight, the camp remains silent. Rows of wagons stand motionless. Animals rest nearby. The valley feels suspended between worlds, not quite asleep, not quite awake. Some researchers continue examining how emigrants adapted psychologically to months of outdoor living. The constant exposure to weather, uncertainty, and changing environments likely altered how people perceive comfort itself. That idea makes sense. Already you notice your standards shifting. A dry blanket feels luxurious. A sheltered campsite feels fortunate. A warm cup of coffee feels magnificent. The cold deepens further before dawn. This becomes the hardest part of the night. The hours just before sunrise, the fire struggles. The wind remains persistent. Every blanket seems slightly thinner than it did earlier. You curl closer to the warmth. Others do the same. Even the animals appear quieter now, conserving energy, waiting, enduring. A faint sound catches your attention. Snow. You listen carefully. No, only leaves moving in the darkness, yet the possibility enters your thoughts. The stories from travelers, the reports from traders, the colder temperatures, everything appears to be moving in a single direction. Not tonight, perhaps. Soon. Very soon. Eventually, the eastern horizon begins to lighten. The first hint of dawn appears. A pale grey line separating earth from sky. Relief spreads through the camp almost immediately. Morning does not bring warmth, not yet, but it brings movement, activity, life. People emerge from blankets looking tired but determined. Frost sparkles across wagons and grass. The creek edges carry a thin layer of ice. Children complain about the cold. Adults quietly agree with them. Breakfast preparations begin. Coffee boils. Fires grow stronger. Hands extend gratefully toward the heat. You stand and stretch. The air bites sharply against your face. The valley looks beautiful. Silver frost, grey sky. Thin curls of smoke rising from dozens of camps. Beautiful and cold. Very cold. As the wagon train slowly awakens, you realize something important. This night was only a preview and not the storm itself. Not the true challenge. Just a reminder, a demonstration, a glimpse of conditions still waiting ahead. And as the sun struggles through the clouds and illuminates the frost-covered camp, every traveller seems to understand the same thing. Winter is no longer approaching. It has begun introducing itself. The storm arrives so quietly that, at first, you almost miss it. The morning begins normally enough, cold, grey, a little uncomfortable. The wagon train breaks camp after sunrise and resumes its westward journey. Frost crunches beneath boots. Breath hangs in the air. The oxen move slowly until their muscles warm. Nothing about the scenes suggests immediate disaster. If anything, the landscape appears unusually calm. That is precisely what makes the first snowflake so surprising. You notice it while crossing a shallow rise. A tiny white speck drifts through the air and lands on your sleeve. Then another. Then a third. The flakes are small, almost delicate. The youngest child points upward excitedly. To him, snow remains a novelty, an interesting development, not a warning. Several adults exchange glances. Their reactions are very different. Nobody panics. Nobody shouts. But attention sharpens immediately. You continue walking. The flakes become more frequent, still light, still harmless. The wagon train presses forward. Many travellers have seen snow before. A few flakes alone are no cause for alarm, yet the sky continues changing. The clouds thicken. The horizon fades. The sunlight disappears completely. A notable historical reality is that weather on the western trails could shift with astonishing speed, particularly in elevated regions and transitional seasons. Conditions that seemed manageable in the morning could become dangerous before evening. You're about to witness exactly that. By midday, the snowfall has become steady. The landscape begins losing detail. Distant hills appear blurred. Faraway landmarks fade into grey. The wind strengthens, not violently, just enough to make people pull coats tighter around their shoulders. The father studies the sky, then the ground, then the sky again. You can almost see calculations unfolding behind his eyes. Distance, time, shelter, risk. The wagon train slows briefly while leaders confer. A decision must be made. Continue moving. Stop early. Search for better protection. There are no perfect answers, only better guesses. The procession continues for now. The reasoning is simple. Movement remains easier while visibility still exists. As long as the trail can be followed, progress offers advantages. The children are placed inside the wagon more frequently. Blankets emerge. Scarves appear. Every family begins making small adjustments. You help secure a canvas flap that keeps snapping in the wind. Your fingers already feel stiff from the cold. The temperature continues falling. Hours pass. The snow thickens. The world grows quieter. That is one of the strangest parts. Snow absorbs sound. The usual noises of travel seem muted. The wagon wheels rumble less loudly. Voices carry shorter distances. Even the wind feels strangely softened. Everything becomes wrapped in a blanket of silence. A curious story, recorded in several frontier accounts, describes emigrants claiming that heavy snowfall made the wilderness feel like an entirely different world, as though familiar landscapes had vanished and been replaced overnight. You understand exactly what they meant. The trail itself is becoming difficult to distinguish. The ground ahead looks increasingly uniform. White, grey, white again. The landmarks people relied upon throughout the journey begin disappearing. A lone tree becomes a shadow. A distant ridge becomes a blur. The horizon almost ceases to exist. During the afternoon, concern spreads more visibly through the wagon train. Not fear. Concern. People start speaking less, watching more. The father checks the oxen repeatedly. The mother ensures every blanket remains dry. The children are instructed to stay close. very close. Even the youngest obeys without argument. That fact alone suggests the situation is becoming serious. The wind strengthens again. This time everyone notices. Snow sweeps sideways across the landscape. Tiny crystals sting exposed skin. You lower your head and continue walking. The wagon beside you creaks under the growing pressure of weather. Canvas snaps sharply. Ropes strain. Wood groans. The entire structure seems alive, struggling against the elements. Several emigrants begin searching the surrounding terrain for a suitable campsite. Finding shelter has become the priority. The storm is no longer a possibility. It is here. The challenge now is choosing where to meet it. Eventually, a location is identified near a cluster of low hills. The protection is limited, but limited protection is better than none. The wagon train begins forming camp earlier than usual. The process feels entirely different from previous evenings. There is no lingering, no leisurely conversation, no wandering. Every person immediately starts working. Animals must be secured, wood gathered, wagons positioned, supplies protected. You help push one wagon into a more sheltered position. The wheels resist movement through accumulating snow. Everyone strains together. The wagon finally shifts. A small victory. Several more follow. Before long, the camp begins taking shape. Not comfortable, not orderly, functional. That is enough. Researchers still debate how much survival during frontier storms depended on leadership versus collective cooperation. In reality, the two often worked together. Strong decisions mattered, but so did dozens of ordinary people carrying them out. You see that cooperation everywhere now. One family shares rope, another helps secure canvas. Someone gathers extra fuel for elderly travelers. Children carry armloads of kindling. Nobody has time for unnecessary pride. The storm is becoming a common problem. The first campfires appear. Keeping them alive proves difficult. Wind drives snow through the air in swirling curtains. Flames bend sideways. Smoke races low across the ground, yet people persist. Eventually, several fires establish themselves. Small islands of warmth in a rapidly freezing world. The snowfall intensifies. Visibility shrinks further. The hills surrounding camp fade in and out like ghosts. You can barely see the outer edge of the wagon train, and darkness has not even arrived yet. That realization feels unsettling. As evening approaches, the storm reveals its true character. The wind begins roaring across the landscape, not merely blowing, roaring. The sound fills the air continuously, a deep, relentless voice. Canvas rattles furiously. Snow sweeps past in dense waves. The campfires struggle. People shout to communicate over the noise. You pull your coat tighter. Snow clings to clothing or to hair, to every exposed surface. The world has narrowed dramatically. This morning, the prairie stretched endlessly in every direction. Now visibility reaches only a short distance beyond the nearest wagon. Everything else has disappeared. The family gathers close together. The children remain wrapped in blankets. The father performs one final inspection of ropes and supplies. The mother distributes extra clothing. No movement is wasted. No preparation feels excessive. Night begins falling. The grey sky darkens toward charcoal. The storm grows louder. Snow spins through the camp like pale smoke. The familiar trail has vanished completely. The horizon has vanished. The landscape itself seems to be dissolving, and as you stand among the wagons listening to the rising wind, you realize that every warning from travelers, traders, and changing skies has led to this moment. The blizzard has finally arrived. The real test is about to begin. The first hours of the blizzard feel less like a storm and more like a siege. The enemy is not attacking all at once. It is testing, probing, searching for weaknesses. You stand beside the wagon while snow streams across the camp in endless waves. The wind roars between the hills. Canvas snaps sharply overhead. Every few minutes another gust arrives, stronger than the last. The campfires are already losing ground. Several have shrunk to glowing circles hidden behind makeshift windbreaks. People crouch close to them, guarding every spark. The family you've been traveling with is doing exactly what countless pioneer families learn to do in difficult weather. Protect the essentials. Everything else comes second. The father checks the wagon again, then checks it once more. You help him tighten a rope that has loosened under the strain of the wind. Your fingers feel clumsy from the cold. The rope itself seems frozen. Nearby, another family struggles with a section of canvas that keeps lifting. 3 people rush over to help. Within moments, the problem is solved. Nobody keeps score. Tonight, cooperation matters more than ownership. An established historical fact is that wagon trains often depended upon mutual assistance during emergencies. Even families who normally travelled independently frequently worked together when storms, accidents, or illness threatened the entire group. You can see why. One wagon alone appears vulnerable. Several wagons working together resemble a small fortress. Snow accumulates rapidly. At first it gathers in corners, then along wheel rims, then against the sides of the wagons. The ground is disappearing beneath a smooth white layer. Every familiar feature becomes harder to recognize. The creek vanishes beneath drifting snow. Paths disappear. Landmarks fade. The world grows simpler and more confusing at the same time. White ground, grey sky, dark wagons, nothing else. The wind suddenly surges. A powerful gust strikes the camp broadside. Canvas billows. Wood creaks alarmingly. One wagon shifts slightly. Voices shout through the storm. Several people rush forward. You join them. Together, boots slipping in the snow, everyone braces against the wagon while additional ropes are secured. The effort succeeds. The structure steadies. For now. The storm seems almost annoyed by the outcome. Another blast follows minutes later. Then another. You begin to understand why experienced emigrants respected weather so deeply. There is no arguing with it, no persuading it, no defeating it, only enduring it. Inside the wagon, the children remain bundled beneath blankets. The youngest keeps asking questions. How long will the storm last? Will the snow cover everything? Can the wind blow the wagon away? Reasonable questions. Unfortunately, nobody possesses reliable answers. The mother responds calmly anyway. That may be one of the most important skills on the frontier. Projecting confidence even when certainty is unavailable, a fascinating frontier curiosity occasionally appears in emigrant recollections. Some families carried treasured household items across the continent through every hardship imaginable. Mirrors, musical instruments, framed portraits, and even delicate china sometimes survived journeys that destroyed far sturdier objects. You glance at the wagon. Somewhere among the supplies are family possessions carried hundreds of miles, objects connected to memories, objects representing home. Tonight they are wrapped carefully beneath blankets and canvas, while a snowstorm attempts to rearrange the landscape outside. Darkness deepens. The blizzard grows stronger. Visibility has become almost non-existent. Standing 20 yards from camp would probably feel like standing in another world. Fortunately, nobody intends to test that theory. The father establishes a simple rule. No one moves anywhere alone. The wisdom of the decision is obvious. Even within camp, people can barely see through the swirling snow. Several travelers tie short guide ropes between nearby wagons. The idea is simple. Follow the rope, find your way back. The solution feels primitive. It is also extremely clever. Frontier survival often worked that way. Simple answers to complicated problems. You spend time helping carry extra wood between wagons. The task becomes surprisingly difficult. Snow blasts against your face. Wind steals your breath. Distances feel longer than they actually are. When you finally return to shelter, it feels like completing a much larger journey. The fire remains alive, barely. Several adults take turns feeding it, guarding it, protecting it from gusts. The flames have become a shared responsibility. An outdoor fire during a storm is less a convenience than a community project. Researchers continue discussing which factors most influence survival during severe weather on Western migrations. Equipment mattered. Experience mattered. Yet social cooperation appears repeatedly throughout surviving accounts. Watching the camp tonight. That conclusion seems entirely reasonable. One family lacks dry wood. Another shares. Someone needs help securing livestock. Neighbors assist. A damaged wagon cover requires repair. Several hands immediately appear. The storm creates difficulties as the community creates solutions. Hours pass and the wind never stops. Its voice becomes part of the background, a constant roar, a constant presence, like the ocean. Only colder, far colder. The snowdrifts continue growing. Some now reach halfway up wagon wheels. Others pile against exposed sides of the camp. You find yourself repeatedly brushing snow away from important areas. Everyone does. The task never seems finished. Nature keeps adding more. One older emigrant jokes that if the storm continues long enough, everyone may wake inside a very large snowbank. The comment earns tired laughter. Humor survives surprisingly well in difficult circumstances, perhaps because people need it most then. Later in the evening, you help check on the animals. The experience leaves a lasting impression. The oxen stand together, presenting broadsides to the wind. Snow gathers along their backs. Their breath rises in thick clouds. They endure the weather with remarkable patience. Not happily, not comfortably, simply steadily, much like the people caring for them. A long-standing scholarly question involves how accurately later memoirs described frontier storms. Memory naturally reshapes experiences over time, yet when dozens of accounts describe similar hardships, a convincing picture begins to emerge. Standing here tonight, you suspect no exaggeration is necessary. Reality provides enough drama on its own. The temperature continues falling. The cold penetrates clothing more aggressively now. Every trip outside shelter feels increasingly unpleasant. Inside the wagon, however, conditions remain somewhat better. Crowded, cramped, cold, but protected from the worst of the wind. The children have finally fallen asleep. The mother watches them quietly. The father listens to the storm. You do the same. The sound dominates everything. Wind, snow, canvas, wood, the endless language of a blizzard. Midnight approaches. The camp remains intact. The wagons remain standing. The fires remain alive. Those facts alone feel like accomplishments, yet no one celebrates, because the storm shows no sign of ending. Outside, the darkness churns with blowing snow. Inside, families wait, watch, endure. And somewhere beyond the circle of wagons, beyond the vanished trail and invisible hills, winter continues tightening its grip on the world. Sometime after midnight, the storm discovers a new target, not the wagons, not the fires, not even the livestock. The storm turns its attention toward patience, toward morale, toward the quiet emotional strength required to endure long hours trapped inside a shrinking world. You sit inside the wagon while snow rattles against the canvas overhead. The sound is constant now. 1,000 tiny impacts. 1,000 reminders that the blizzard remains outside. The children are awake again. Not fully awake, not fully asleep. The uncomfortable middle ground familiar to anyone who's ever tried resting during bad weather. A powerful gust shakes the wagon. The youngest sits upright immediately. Was that the wind? His mother smiles. Just the wind. Another gust follows, slightly stronger. The answer remains unchanged. Still the wind. The response works, at least temporarily. You begin realizing that much of frontier parenting involved deciding which worries deserved attention and which worries deserved calm reassurance. Tonight, reassurance wins repeatedly. The wagon interior feels crowded. Blankets occupy every available space. Supplies fill corners. Clothing hangs where it can dry. The family has transformed a transport vehicle into a temporary refuge. Not comfortable, not spacious. Safe enough, and safe enough often becomes the most valuable phrase on the frontier. Outside, voices occasionally drift through the storm. Someone checking ropes, someone tending a fire, someone ensuring animals remain secure. The camp is sleeping in shifts rather than sleeping completely. A practical arrangement. One person rests while another watches. Then they trade places. A historical detail frequently mentioned in emigrant journals is that children often adapted to trail life faster than adults expected. Long journeys forced them to become flexible, resourceful, and surprisingly resilient. You see evidence of that now. The older children are frightened by the storm. Of course they are, yet they are also curious. One asks whether snow can bury an entire wagon. Another wonders how deep the drifts will become. A third wants to know if people at home are experiencing the same weather. The questions arrive endlessly. The mother answers each one with remarkable patience. The father contributes occasional explanations. Together they create something more important than information. They create calm. That calm spreads throughout the wagon. The storm remains exactly as dangerous as before. The atmosphere inside changes completely. A fascinating frontier oddity appears in several family recollections. Some parents invented elaborate stories during difficult stretches of travel, turning storms, rivers, and mountains into characters within ongoing adventures designed to entertain restless children. You witness something similar tonight. The youngest asks why the wind keeps making noise. His father thinks for a moment, then explains that the wind is searching for a place to sleep. Unfortunately, every hill keeps telling it to move somewhere else. The explanation is objectively ridiculous. The child loves it immediately. For the next 15 minutes, the wind becomes a wandering traveller unable to find lodging. Everyone seems happier, even you. The storm continues. The story continues. Somehow both coexist. Hours pass. The wagon sways occasionally beneath stronger gusts. Snow taps against the canvas. The fire outside glows faintly through a small opening. The family remains gathered together. The simple closeness matters. Human beings have always found comfort in shared spaces during uncertain times. Researchers examining pioneer family life often note how heavily survival depended upon cooperation within households. Labor, resources, responsibilities, and emotional support were all shared necessities rather than luxuries. Tonight provides a perfect example. No one faces the storm alone. The older daughter begins quietly singing, not loudly, just enough for those nearby to hear. The melody drifts through the wagon, soft, gentle, steady. Soon the younger children relax noticeably. The storm outside seems slightly farther away. Music has that effect, even when conditions remain unchanged. You listen carefully, the song is simple, yet it transforms the atmosphere. The wagon no longer feels like a cramped shelter. It feels like a home, a temporary one, a moving one, a cold one, still a home. Eventually, the father leaves briefly to assist with camp duties. When he returns, snow covers his coat, ice clings to his beard. The children stare at him with wide eyes. For a moment he resembles some strange snow-covered wilderness spirit. He notices their expressions and laughs. The laughter spreads immediately. The tension breaks. That may be another overlooked survival skill, the ability to laugh at the right moment. A number of trail memoirs mention humor appearing in surprisingly difficult situations. People joked about mud, weather, broken wagons, and countless inconveniences. Humor did not solve problems. It simply made carrying them easier. Outside, the storm remains relentless. Inside, however, the mood continues improving. Stories replace worry. Questions replace fear. Conversation replaces silence. The mother begins describing the farm they hope to build in Oregon. Fields, animals, fruit trees, a proper house. The children listen carefully. Future plans become another form of comfort, a reminder that the journey leads somewhere, a reminder that the storm represents a chapter rather than the entire story. Some scholars continue discussing how much optimism contributed to emigrant endurance during difficult migrations. Material preparation clearly mattered, yet belief in a better future appears repeatedly throughout personal accounts. Listening to this family, the importance of that belief becomes obvious. The dream of Oregon occupies very little physical space, yet it fills the wagon completely. Another hour passes. The youngest finally drift to sleep. Then the others follow, one by one. The storm's audience gradually disappears. Only the adults remain awake. You sit quietly while they watch the flickering light beyond the canvas. Neither speaks for a while. No words are necessary. The wind supplies enough conversation. Eventually, the mother adjusts a blanket around one sleeping child. Then another. Then another. A small act. An ancient act. One repeated by parents in every era. Outside, the blizzard continues reshaping the world. Inside, a mother simply makes sure her children remain warm. The contrast feels strangely powerful. You close your eyes briefly. The wagon creaks. The snow falls. The wind searches endlessly through the darkness. Yet the sounds no longer feel quite as threatening, because human beings possess an unusual talent. Even in difficult places, even during long storms, even on a frozen trail thousands of miles from home, they find ways to create normal moments. And as the children sleep beneath their blankets while the blizzard rages beyond the canvas walls, you begin to understand that survival involves more than food, fire, and shelter. Sometimes survival means preserving a sense of ordinary life while extraordinary weather tries to take it away. By the time dawn should be arriving, it becomes clear that the storm has no interest in schedules. The darkness outside the wagon remains nearly complete. Snow still lashes against the canvas. Wind still roars across the hills. The world feels suspended between night and morning. You wake to the smell of smoke. Not dangerous smoke, comforting smoke, the scent of a stubborn fire that has somehow survived another long stretch of brutal weather. Nearby, someone feeds additional wood into the flames. The crackling sound feels reassuring, almost cheerful, a reminder that at least one small battle continues going in the camp's favour. You pull your blanket tighter and immediately notice the cold. Not the sharp cold of stepping outside, the deeper cold that settles into objects after many hours. The wagon walls feel cold, the supplies feel cold, even the air inside the shelter feels heavy with winter. The mother is already awake. She carefully unwraps food supplies. Breakfast today requires no elaborate preparation. Everyone understands the situation. Warmth matters more than variety. Calories matter more than presentation. Soon the smell of coffee fills the wagon. It might be the finest aroma on the continent. At least it seems that way this morning. The father returns from checking conditions outside. Snow covers nearly every visible surface. His coat looks as though it has been rolled through a snowbank. His expression reveals enough without words. The storm continues. You eventually step outside. The experience feels like walking into another world. The camp still exists. Barely. Wagons emerge from drifting snow like stranded ships. The familiar shapes remain recognizable, yet everything looks altered. Smaller, whiter, more isolated. The wind attacks immediately. It pushes at clothing, steals warmth, fills the air with spinning crystals. You lower your head and continue forward. Several fires remain alive. Maintaining them has become a major priority. A historical reality often overlooked in popular depictions of westward migration is just how dependent emigrants were on fuel. In severe weather, access to firewood could become nearly as important as access to food. Today that truth feels impossible to ignore. Wood piles have shrunk noticeably. People watch them carefully. Every log placed on a fire receives consideration. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is casual. You join several emigrants gathering additional fuel from nearby areas. The task is difficult. Snow hides branches. Wind slows movement. Visibility remains poor. Yet everyone understands the necessity. Without fire, conditions become dramatically worse. The search produces modest success. A few fallen limbs, several bundles of brush. Enough to help, not enough to relax. The fuel is carried back to camp, added carefully to the collective supply. One elderly traveller jokes that frontier life occasionally resembles a full-time career in wood collection. Several people laugh. The observation feels accurate. Throughout history, survival has often involved repetitive tasks performed with extraordinary persistence. Keeping warm belongs firmly in that category. A curious detail from emigrant diaries reveals that some families carried small iron stoves designed for wagon travel. These devices offered advantages during cold weather, though they also added weight and required valuable fuel. You notice one such stove operating in a neighbouring wagon. Thin smoke rises from a metal pipe. The sight inspires considerable envy among nearby travellers. Luxury exists on a spectrum. Today, a warm stove occupies the highest category imaginable. As the morning progresses, efforts to preserve heat become increasingly creative. Extra blankets are layered together. Openings in wagon covers are sealed. People sit closer to one another. Hot drinks circulate constantly. The camp begins functioning like a living organism. Every action focuses on retaining warmth. Every decision serves that goal. You spend part of the day helping strengthen a windbreak near one of the fires. Snow blocks some of the wind naturally. Additional boards provide further protection. The improvement is modest, yet the fire immediately burns more steadily. Small victories matter, especially when large victories are unavailable. Hours pass slowly. The storm remains relentless. The landscape beyond camp has vanished entirely. You could be anywhere. A valley, a mountain pass, the surface of the moon. The view changes very little. White snow, grey sky, blowing wind, endless repetition. That repetition affects people, not physically at first, mentally. The storm becomes the entire world. Researchers continue examining how isolation and confinement influenced emigrant experiences during severe weather events. While exact emotional responses varied, many personal accounts describe a strange distortion of time during long storms. You understand why. Minutes feel longer, hours stretch, the future narrows. Everyone becomes focused on immediate needs, warmth, food, shelter. Another interesting frontier anecdote describes emigrants placing heated metal objects inside blankets before sleep. The practice required caution, but offered precious comfort during especially cold nights. Comfort. That word carries new significance now. Comfort is no longer a soft chair or pleasant room. Comfort is dry socks, a protected fire, a cup of coffee, a blanket that remains warm for 10 consecutive minutes. The standards have shifted dramatically. By afternoon, the wind intensifies again. Snow sweeps through camp in thick curtains. Several people immediately move to inspect ropes and canvas coverings. The storm has already demonstrated how quickly small problems become larger ones. No one wishes to repeat that lesson. You assist with another inspection. A loosened knot is tightened. A drifting pile of snow is cleared away. A section of canvas receives reinforcement. Routine maintenance becomes an ongoing process. The weather never stops testing the camp. The camp never stops responding. A question still explored by some historians concerns which factor contributed most to successful winter survival: on the trail equipment, experience, or adaptability. Watching this camp, adaptability seems like a strong candidate. People constantly adjust, constantly improvise, constantly respond. The environment changes, they change with it. As evening approaches, the light fades almost imperceptibly. The sky was already dark. Now it simply becomes darker. The campfires glow brighter in response. Their orange light reflects from the snow. Tiny sparks drift upward and vanish into the storm. The family gathers together once more. Dinner is modest, warm, appreciated. The children seem tired. Everyone seems tired. Even the storm sounds tired somehow. Not weaker, just endlessly persistent, like a giant creature muttering to itself beyond the hills. You sit quietly near the fire. The warmth reaches your face. The wind attacks your back. 2 seasons seem to exist simultaneously, one on each side of the flames. Beyond the circle of light, snow continues falling. Beyond the snow, the trail remains hidden. Beyond the hidden trail lies Oregon, still waiting, still distant. And as another storm-bound evening settles over the camp, the pioneer families continue doing what people have always done when confronted by winter. They gather close, protect the fire, share what they have, and hold tightly to warmth whenever they can find it. The third morning of the storm arrives without a sunrise. There is light, there is darkness, but there is no clear moment separating one from the other. The sky remains a solid ceiling of grey, and snow continues drifting through the air as though it has forgotten how to do anything else. You step outside the wagon and pause. The camp looks unfamiliar, not damaged, not destroyed, simply transformed. Snowdrifts rise where open ground once existed. Wagon wheels have nearly vanished beneath packed snow. The creek can no longer be seen. Even the shape of the valley has changed. Nature has quietly redesigned the landscape overnight. Several emigrants stand nearby studying the surroundings, or attempting to. There is remarkably little to study. Visibility has improved slightly since the worst hours of the blizzard, yet the world remains blurred and indistinct. The hills appear as pale shadows. Everything beyond them has disappeared completely. The father squints into the distance, then shakes his head. You understand immediately. The trail is gone, not difficult to find. Gone, covered, hidden beneath layers of snow. A documented reality of overland travel is that trails often became surprisingly difficult to follow after severe weather. Wagon ruts, landmarks, and familiar terrain features could vanish beneath snow, mud, or floodwater, forcing travelers to rely on memory and judgment. Today that challenge stands directly in front of everyone. No visible road remains, no helpful tracks, no convenient signs pointing west, only white, endless white. Breakfast conversations revolve around a single topic: navigation, or what happens when the storm ends. How will the trail be found? Which landmarks remain reliable? Everyone has opinions. Few have certainty. The father believes nearby hills may provide reference points once visibility improves. Another traveller suggests following the creek. Someone else proposes waiting until conditions become clearer. All reasonable ideas, all incomplete. The problem with wilderness navigation is that certainty often arrives after it becomes useful. You finish breakfast and accompany several men attempting to assess the surrounding area. The excursion feels strangely unsettling. Camp remains visible behind you, yet after only a short distance, familiar shapes begin fading into snow and mist. The sensation is immediate, disorienting. You suddenly understand why people fear becoming lost in winter weather. The landscape provides almost no information. Every direction appears equally plausible. Every drift resembles the last. A delightful but somewhat absurd frontier anecdote tells of emigrants occasionally arguing about directions while standing on the same trail. Human confidence in navigation has always exceeded actual navigational skill. You suspect such disagreements become even more entertaining during blizzards. The exploration party eventually reaches a small rise. From there, the view improves slightly, not enough. The hills remain visible. A few scattered trees emerge from the whiteness. Everything else disappears into grey distance. No trail can be identified. No obvious route presents itself. The men exchange thoughtful looks. Nobody enjoys the conclusion. The road west cannot be followed because the road west cannot be seen. Back at camp, practical work continues. Waiting does not eliminate responsibilities. Snow must be cleared. Animals must be cared for. Firewood must be managed. Life continues even while travel pauses. You help dig around one wagon whose wheels have become buried beneath drifting snow. The effort proves surprisingly exhausting. Snow looks light. Snow is not light, at least not when moved repeatedly with a shovel, or a board, or whatever tool happens to be available. The children watch the work with fascination. To them, the storm has become part hardship and part adventure. The youngest seems convinced the camp is slowly transforming into a castle, a snow castle specifically. His enthusiasm remains difficult to resist. A growing number of historians have noted that children's recollections of frontier journeys often differed dramatically from adult memories. Adults remembered responsibility, ability, and risk. Children frequently remembered novelty and discovery. Watching these youngsters, that observation feels entirely believable. The afternoon drifts onward. The snowfall finally begins weakening, not stopping, weakening. The difference feels significant. The wind remains present but less aggressive. The sky remains grey but slightly brighter. Hope begins appearing around camp, carefully, cautiously. Nobody trusts the weather completely yet. Still, the change is impossible to ignore. Several travellers climb nearby rises to search for recognizable landmarks. You join one group. The climb itself is difficult. Snow reaches above your boots in places. The cold air burns pleasantly in your lungs. At the summit, everyone stops. The view has improved, somewhat, enough to reveal the scale of the challenge. The valley below appears transformed beyond recognition. Snowdrifts carve new shapes across the landscape. Former paths have vanished. The creek exists only as a faint suggestion beneath white curves. The wagon camp resembles a collection of dark islands floating within a frozen sea. Researchers still examine how emigrants reconstructed routes after severe weather events. The process often involved comparing visible landmarks, consulting guidebooks, and relying upon collective experience rather than any single source of information. Looking around, you understand why teamwork mattered. One person notices a ridge, another identifies a cluster of trees, a third remembers a bend in the creek. Together, fragments become knowledge. Alone, each fragment remains incomplete. The exploration party eventually returns to camp carrying mixed news. Some landmarks can still be recognized. Others remain hidden. Finding the trail appears possible. Finding it quickly appears less certain. The distinction matters. As evening approaches, the storm continues fading. Slowly, reluctantly. The wind weakens further. Snow falls more lightly. For the first time in days, brief patches of brightness appear within the clouds. Not sunlight exactly, the suggestion of sunlight. People notice immediately. Faces turn upward. Conversations pause. Hope requires very little encouragement. Dinner feels different tonight. The mood has shifted, not because problems are solved, because solutions now seem imaginable. The trail remains hidden. The snow remains deep. The challenges remain substantial. Yet the storm no longer feels unstoppable. That alone changes everything. Around the fire, travelers discuss routes and landmarks once more. This time the conversations sound less worried, more practical. The father sketches rough ideas in the snow with a stick. Others contribute observations. The discussion resembles a frontier planning meeting. Simple, informal, important. An enduring academic debate centers on how much success on the Oregon Trail depended upon individual skill versus collective knowledge. The answer likely varies from situation to situation. Tonight, collective knowledge appears indispensable. No single traveler possesses all the answers. Together, however, they possess enough. Night arrives quietly. For the first time in several days, the wind does not dominate every sound. You can hear voices again, crackling fires, the shifting animals, the small ordinary noises of camp life. The blizzard is loosening its grip, not releasing it entirely. Not yet, but loosening. You settle beside the fire and stare into the darkness beyond camp. Somewhere beneath the snow lies the road west, hidden, waiting. And as the clouds slowly thin overhead, and the first genuine possibility of movement returns to people's thoughts, the pioneer families begin preparing for a challenge very different from enduring the storm. Soon they will need to find their way through the world it has left behind. The morning begins with a sound you have not heard in days. Silence, not complete silence. The camp is still alive with movement. Fires crackle, people talk, animals shift in the snow. But the great roaring voice of the blizzard is gone. Its absence feels almost shocking. You wake and listen carefully. No constant howl. No endless pounding of wind against canvas. Only ordinary sounds, small sounds, human sounds. For a few moments, nobody seems eager to break the spell. People emerge slowly from wagons and blankets. They stand looking around as though seeing the world for the first time. In many ways, they are. The storm has transformed everything. Sunlight finally appears through thinning clouds. The effect is immediate and astonishing. Snowdrifts sparkle. Ice crystals flash like tiny diamonds. The valley glows beneath a pale golden light. What looked threatening yesterday now appears strangely beautiful. Winter has a talent for creating landscapes that are simultaneously magnificent and inconvenient. The camp begins stirring with renewed energy. People smile more easily. Conversations grow louder. Even the children seem transformed. The youngest immediately attempts to climb a snowdrift and slides halfway back down. His determination survives the experience, his dignity less so. Several adults laugh. The sound feels wonderful. One of the enduring facts of trail life is that morale often improved rapidly after difficult weather passed. Human beings adapt surprisingly quickly once they believe conditions are improving. You can witness that adaptation unfolding all around you. The problems remain. The trail is still buried. The snow is still deep. The journey is still paused. Yet the simple appearance of sunlight changes everything. Breakfast becomes almost festive by frontier standards. Coffee steams in the cold air. People gather around fires. Stories from the storm are already beginning. That happens remarkably fast. Events become stories almost as soon as they end. One traveller claims a snowdrift nearly swallowed an entire wagon. Another insists his campfire survived a gust strong enough to lift a horse. The details may grow more impressive with each retelling. That is simply how storytelling works. You spend part of the morning helping clear snow from around the wagons. The work remains exhausting, yet the mood feels lighter. Neighbours move between camps offering assistance. Tools are shared. Labour is shared. Advice is shared. The storm may have isolated everyone temporarily. Now it is producing the opposite effect. Communities often become stronger after facing hardship together. An unusual detail preserved in some emigrant accounts describes families exchanging recipes, songs, and household tips during weather delays. Long interruptions sometimes created unexpected opportunities for social connection. You can imagine it easily. The camp resembles a temporary village more than a collection of separate travellers. A woman shares extra coffee with a neighbouring family. A man helps repair a damaged wagon cover. Children from different wagons play together atop snowbanks. The lines separating one household from another seem less important now. You join a group heading toward a nearby rise to evaluate conditions. The climb feels easier today. The sky is clearer, the air calmer. At the summit, the view stretches across miles of snow-covered country. The sight takes your breath away. The landscape appears endless. White hills, white valleys, white fields. The world has become a vast frozen ocean. Yet hidden within that beauty lies a problem. The trail remains nearly invisible. Several travellers study the terrain carefully, pointing, comparing memories, discussing landmarks. One identifies a distinctive ridge. Another recognizes a cluster of trees. A third remembers the direction of the creek. Bit by bit, the geography begins returning. Researchers still examine how emigrants reconstructed routes after severe storms, and surviving journals often highlight the importance of shared observation. One person's memory might be uncertain. 10 people's memories could reveal a pattern. The process resembles assembling a puzzle. No single piece explains everything. Together they create a picture. Back at camp, practical recovery continues. Snow is removed from wagon wheels. Animal shelters receive attention. Supplies are inspected for damage. You help unload several items that need drying. Blankets, clothing, a few food sacks. Fortunately, most were protected well. Preparation during the early hours of the storm is paying dividends now. The father seems pleased by that fact, not proud, relieved. Relief may be one of the most satisfying emotions on the frontier. The livestock receive special attention. You accompany several travellers checking on the oxen. The animals appear tired but healthy. Their thick coats are dusted with frost. Their breath drifts upward in pale clouds. They endure the storm much as they endure everything else, steadily, patiently, without complaint. A charming frontier story occasionally appears in memoirs describing oxen who became so familiar with trail routines that they seemed to know when camp was ending before people announced it. Whether every tale is accurate remains open to question. Still, anyone who spends enough time around working animals begins attributing surprising intelligence to them, sometimes with good reason. The afternoon passes beneath increasingly bright skies. More blue appears overhead. The snow reflects sunlight so intensely that people squint while working. The camp begins looking less like an emergency shelter and more like a functioning community again. Children build crude snow forts. Adults pretend not to notice while secretly approving. Several fires burn steadily. Meals are prepared. Repairs continue. Life reasserts itself. A topic that continues to interest historians involves how frontier communities developed informal systems of mutual aid. There was often no official authority organizing assistance. People simply recognized shared interests and acted accordingly. That principle appears everywhere today. Nobody issues orders. Nobody establishes committees. Yet work gets done. Someone needs help. Help arrives. Simple, effective. As evening approaches, the camp gathers around larger fires than usual. Not because warmth is scarce, because company feels valuable. People exchange storm stories, compare experiences, laugh at small mishaps that felt far less amusing during the actual blizzard. The youngest child proudly describes his battle with a snowdrift. His version contains several heroic elements unsupported by witnesses. No one challenges the account. A good story deserves room to grow. You sit beside the flames and watch sparks rise into the darkening sky. For the first time in many nights, stars appear overhead. Hundreds of them, then thousands. The sight draws attention immediately. Several people stop talking simply to look. The stars seem brighter after days of cloud and snow. Perhaps they always were. Perhaps absence made them more noticeable. Either way, the effect is powerful. The camp feels peaceful. Not comfortable exactly. Still cold, still surrounded by snow, still stranded temporarily, yet peaceful. The storm has passed. The people have endured. The wagons remain standing. The families remain together. And as laughter drifts softly through the clear evening air and the stars shine above the frozen valley, you begin to understand something important. The blizzard did more than test the wagon train. It reminded everyone how much strength can be found in neighbors standing close together when the weather turns against them. The evening fire seems larger than usual. Perhaps it truly is. Perhaps it only feels that way after so many nights spent protecting tiny flames from relentless wind. Either way, the circle of light spreading across the snow creates a sense of comfort that no one takes for granted. You settle onto a log near the fire while darkness gathers around the camp. Above, the sky remains clear. Stars glitter with astonishing brightness. The same heavens watched over the wagon train during the storm. Tonight they appear kinder. The contrast feels almost personal. Around the flames, families gather naturally, not because anyone has announced a meeting, not because rules require it, because people enjoy company after difficult experiences. The work of recovery continues during the day. The work of restoring spirits often happens at night. Children sit wrapped in blankets. Adults cradle cups of coffee. The fire crackles steadily. The sound feels wonderfully ordinary. For several minutes, nobody says much. Everyone seems content simply listening. The snow reflects firelight in shades of gold and orange. tiny sparks drift upward and disappear among the stars. The scene possesses a peaceful quality almost impossible to imagine during the height of the blizzard. Eventually, stories begin. They always do. Human beings appear incapable of sitting around a fire indefinitely without sharing memories. One older emigrant recalls crossing a river earlier in the journey. Another describes a near encounter with a buffalo herd. Someone else remembers a spectacular thunderstorm back in Missouri. Each story leads naturally into another. The fire becomes a doorway through which dozens of experiences return. A well-known aspect of life on the Oregon Trail was the importance of storytelling. Long evenings, difficult conditions, and endless miles encouraged travelers to share memories, advice, and entertainment with one another. Tonight you understand exactly why. Stories provide more than amusement. They provide perspective. The storm begins shrinking as people talk, not physically, emotionally. It becomes something that happened rather than something still happening. The youngest child requests a tale immediately, then another, then one more after that. His enthusiasm remains impressively relentless. An older woman eventually tells a humorous story about a runaway pig that somehow joined a wagon train for several days before anyone identified its owner. Whether every detail is accurate remains impossible to determine. Accuracy is not necessarily the point. The listeners laugh, the storyteller smiles, the evening improves. A peculiar little historical curiosity appears in several frontier recollections. Some emigrants carried favourite books across thousands of miles despite limited wagon space. The decision seems impractical until you remember how valuable reading became during long evenings and weather delays. You notice one traveller holding a worn volume near the firelight. Several others gather close to listen while passages are read aloud. The scene feels timeless. A group of people sharing stories beside a fire beneath a winter sky. The technology changes across centuries. The instinct remains. Hours pass gently. The conversation shifts from humorous memories to songs. Someone begins humming softly. Another joins. Soon several voices contribute. The music drifts through the cold air. Simple melodies. Familiar melodies. Songs remembered from distant homes. The effect is remarkable. For a few minutes, the frozen valley seems smaller. The road to Oregon seems shorter. The distance from home feels less overwhelming. Researchers studying emigrant diaries often note the role of music in maintaining morale. Singing required no equipment beyond willing voices, yet it offered companionship, entertainment, and emotional comfort. Tonight the evidence is impossible to miss. The children gradually grow sleepy. One leans against a parent, another wraps more tightly in blankets. The youngest tries very hard to remain awake. He fails heroically. Several adults smile as his eyes finally close. Nearby, the father begins sharing memories of the journey itself, the first river crossings, the endless prairie, the strange ash that drifted through the air weeks ago. You remember that ash. It feels like another lifetime. The storm has altered everyone's sense of time. Events before it seem strangely distant. Yet the memories return easily around the fire. One traveller remarks that the blizzard will probably become the story everyone tells after reaching Oregon. Another disagrees. Surely something even stranger lies ahead. The debate continues. Frontier optimism often expresses itself in unexpected ways. A delightful anecdote preserved in Western memoirs describes emigrants occasionally inventing playful competitions during long delays. Guessing games, riddles, and storytelling contests helped pass time when travel became impossible. Soon something similar develops around the fire. A challenge is proposed. Who can tell the most unbelievable true story from the journey? The contest begins immediately. Accounts become increasingly dramatic. One man describes losing a hat during a windstorm and finding it days later. A woman recalls waking to discover a curious animal investigating camp supplies. Another traveller claims he once spent an entire afternoon arguing with a mule. The mule apparently won. The audience finds this entirely believable. Laughter spreads through the group. The sound echoes softly across the snow. For a moment, you glance beyond the firelight. The darkness remains vast. The wilderness remains enormous. Yet the camp feels secure, warm, connected. Some scholars continue exploring how temporary communities formed along the Oregon Trail. People often traveled together for months despite beginning as strangers. Shared challenges accelerated relationships that might otherwise have taken years to develop. Looking round the fire, that conclusion seems difficult to dispute. The people here have endured weather, uncertainty, distance, and hardship together. They know one another now in ways ordinary neighbours might never understand. The evening grows later. The songs become quieter. The stories become slower. Several children have already fallen asleep. Adults speak in softer voices. The fire settles into a steady glow. Nobody seems eager to leave. The simple act of sitting together feels valuable, perhaps even necessary. The stars continue shining overhead. Cold air drifts through the valley. The snow reflects moonlight beyond the camp. Everything appears calm, peaceful, restored. The storm has left work behind. There are trails to find, wagons to free, miles to travel, yet those concerns belong largely to tomorrow. Tonight belongs to the fire, to songs, to stories, to laughter. And as another tale begins somewhere across the circle, and familiar voices mingle with the crackling of burning wood, you realize that pioneer families survived more than storms because they carried more than supplies. They carried memories, humor, music, hope, the invisible things that take up no wagon space, yet somehow help people travel the farthest. The morning sun rises bright and cold over a world that still belongs to winter. Its light pours across the valley, turning every snowdrift into a glowing curve of silver and gold. The storm may have passed, but its work remains visible everywhere. You step outside and immediately hear a familiar sound. Oxen, not moving, not pulling, simply breathing. The steady rhythm drifts through the crisp air. It reminds you that while people spent the blizzard worrying about wagons, fires, and trails, another group endured the storm as well, the animals. Today, much of the camp's attention focuses on them, for good reason. Without healthy animals, the journey west cannot continue. The Oregon Trail depended upon human determination, certainly. It also depended upon thousands of hooves. You accompany the father toward the livestock area. The snow crunches beneath your boots. The air feels clean now, sharp, refreshing, the kind of cold that wakes every sense. The oxen stand together near a partially cleared area. Snow still clings to their coats. Their broad bodies steam faintly in the morning sunlight. They look sturdy, solid, reliable. Exactly what emigrants hoped for when selecting draft animals. A widely accepted historical fact is that oxen were often preferred over horses for long overland journeys because they were generally hardier, less expensive, and better suited to difficult trail conditions. They were slower. No one would deny that. Yet survival and speed are not always the same thing. You watch several travellers inspect their animals carefully. Legs, hooves, harnesses, general condition. The examinations are thorough. A healthy ox represents transportation, labour, and investment all at once. Neglecting one would be like neglecting a wagon wheel, a tool chest, and a vehicle engine simultaneously. The animals themselves seem pleased by the improving weather, or at least less annoyed by existence. One ox lowers its head, and begins investigating a patch of exposed grass. Its optimism exceeds the available vegetation. Still, the effort is admirable. Nearby, horses receive attention as well. Their coats are brushed, ice is removed from tangled hair, water is carried to them whenever possible. The care requires time. Nobody complains. Everyone understands the importance. A curious frontier tidbit appears in several emigrant narratives. Some families gave their draft animals nicknames and spoke about them almost as additional members of the household. After months on the trail, that emotional attachment makes sense. People spend enormous amounts of time with these animals. Shared hardship creates unusual relationships. One older traveller introduces you to an ox named General. The animal appears entirely unaware of its military rank. The title seems to have been awarded without consultation. General accepts this arrangement calmly. The morning continues with practical work. Snow is cleared from feeding areas. Paths are opened. Animals are exercised when possible. The camp resembles a small agricultural community rather than a collection of travellers. Every task connects to the same objective, preparing for movement. Eventually, not yet, but soon. You help transport bundles of feed stored carefully during the storm. The animals greet the arrival enthusiastically. The reaction is immediate. Heads lift. Bodies shift. Attention focuses entirely upon breakfast. Some priorities remain wonderfully universal. Researchers continue examining the economic importance of livestock on Western migrations. Losing draft animals could dramatically alter a family's prospects, sometimes forcing major changes to travel plans. Watching people care for their animals today, that reality becomes obvious. These creatures are not optional. They are essential. By midday, the sun has softened portions of the snow, not enough to remove it, just enough to create subtle changes. Tiny streams begin appearing along exposed slopes. Icicles drip occasionally. The landscape remains frozen, but no longer feels entirely locked in place. You join a small group walking beyond camp to locate additional grazing opportunities. The journey reveals how thoroughly the storm transformed the region. Snow covers almost everything. Yet patches of grass occasionally emerge on windswept ridges. Every discovery receives immediate interest. Animals require fuel just as surely as people do. The search becomes a practical treasure hunt. One traveller points toward a distant hillside where sunlight has exposed more vegetation. Another suggests rotating grazing locations to avoid exhausting any single area. The discussion sounds remarkably modern. Good resource management never goes out of style. A particularly entertaining story circulates during the walk. According to one veteran traveller, a stubborn mule once refused to cross a shallow stream for nearly 3 hours despite repeated encouragement. The moment everyone gave up and started unpacking supplies, the mule crossed voluntarily. Whether the story has gained embellishments over time is difficult to know. Nobody seems especially concerned about accuracy. The mule's reputation has already been established. Back in camp, children continue showing great interest in the animals. The youngest has appointed himself assistant ox supervisor. The position exists entirely within his imagination. Nevertheless, he performs the duties with impressive dedication. The oxen appear tolerant of his management style. The afternoon passes beneath clear skies. The camp grows increasingly active. Repairs continue. Planning continues. The trail ahead remains hidden in places, but confidence is growing. Several scouting parties report encouraging signs. Landmarks are becoming easier to identify. Routes are beginning to reappear. Movement feels closer. The animals seem to sense it too, or perhaps the humans simply want to believe they do. Some historians continue debating how much frontier people interpreted animal behavior through the lens of hope, fear and expectation. Humans have always been talented at assigning meaning to actions that may possess entirely different explanations. Regardless, the camp feels more energetic, more forward-looking, more alive. Late in the afternoon, you help inspect harness equipment, leather straps receive attention, metal fittings are checked, ropes are replaced when necessary. The process is meticulous. A failed harness on a snowy trail could create serious problems. Preparation now prevents difficulties later. The father works carefully, methodically. Every buckle, every connection, every knot. The storm rewarded preparation. Nobody has forgotten that lesson. As evening approaches, long shadows stretch across the valley. The animals settle once more. Fires begin appearing throughout camp. Smoke rises straight upward into calm air. The contrast with the blizzard feels almost unbelievable. Only days ago, the wind dominated everything. Now the valley rests in quiet stillness. You stand for a moment watching the oxen. Their silhouettes glow softly against the snow. Patient creatures, strong creatures. They endured the storm just as the families did, together. And as the sun sinks behind distant hills and another peaceful evening settles over the camp, you begin appreciating an often overlooked truth of the Oregon Trail. The journey west was never carried by people alone. It moved forward on countless sturdy legs, patient hearts, and determined animals that shared every mile, every hardship, and every storm along the way. The longest night arrives after the storm has already passed. At first, that seems impossible. Surely the worst moment should have occurred when the wind was strongest, when the snow was deepest, when the trail disappeared. Yet hardship does not always follow simple rules. Sometimes the most difficult period arrives afterward, when people finally have enough quiet to think. The camp settles beneath a clear sky. Stars fill the darkness from horizon to horizon. The fires burn steadily. The animals rest peacefully. Everything appears calm, and yet a subtle heaviness lingers over the valley. You notice it almost immediately. Not despair, not fear, exhaustion. The deep, lingering exhaustion that follows days of constant vigilance. For nearly a week, everyone has remained alert, protecting wagons, protecting supplies, protecting children, protecting livestock. Now that immediate danger has faded, tiredness finally demands attention. You sit beside the fire and study the faces around you. People look older than they did before the storm. Only slightly. Enough to notice. The father stares into the flames longer than usual. The mother moves more slowly while organizing supplies. Even conversations seem quieter tonight. A recurring observation in many emigrant diaries is that physical hardships often produce delayed emotional effects. People remained focused during crises, then felt the full weight of events once conditions improved. That pattern seems to be unfolding here. The work of recovery continues. The work of reflection has begun. Dinner passes quietly. The children eat with less energy than usual. The youngest still manages to tell an enthusiastic story involving a snow fort and a heroic ox named General. His imagination remains remarkably healthy. The adults appreciate the contribution, perhaps more than he realizes. Children often serve as reminders that the future still exists. After the meal, the camp gathers around several larger fires, not for celebration, for company. There is comfort in shared silence, comfort in knowing others experience the same storm, the same uncertainty, the same long nights. You listen while travelers discuss practical matters, food supplies, road conditions, distances remaining. The conversation remains grounded. Nobody wants dramatic speculation. Everyone prefers useful information. The future feels close enough now to deserve planning. An interesting historical observation appears in numerous pioneer accounts. Many emigrants measured progress not simply by miles travelled, but by obstacles overcome. Rivers crossed, mountains passed, storms survived. These milestones often mattered more emotionally than distance alone. The blizzard has clearly become one of those milestones. People refer to it naturally now, before the storm, during the storm, after the storm. The event has already divided time into categories. A traveller across the fire begins describing previous winters back east. Others contribute memories of home, frozen ponds, snow-covered farms, church bells in winter villages. The conversation drifts gently through the past. You notice how often people mention familiar sounds, not buildings, not possessions, sounds. Human memory works in fascinating ways. A particularly charming frontier anecdote tells of emigrants recreating favourite holiday traditions on the trail using whatever materials happen to be available. Improvisation often replaced perfection. The story sparks additional memories. Someone recalls homemade decorations. Another remembers family gatherings. The firelight grows warmer as the stories continue. Not physically, emotionally. Researchers continue discussing how emigrants maintain psychological resilience during extended migrations. Social bonds, shared routines, and future goals appear repeatedly in surviving personal accounts. Listening to these conversations, the reasons become clear. Human beings rarely endure challenges entirely through individual strength. They rely upon one another, upon stories, upon familiar habits, upon hope. The stars overhead seem unusually bright tonight. The air remains cold, yet the wind is gone. You had almost forgotten what true stillness sounds like. No canvas snapping, no snow hissing across the ground. Only crackling wood and quiet voices. The silence feels almost sacred. Eventually? The father stands and walks a short distance from the fire. You accompany him. Together you look across the sleeping valley. Snow reflects starlight. Wagons appear as dark shapes scattered across the landscape. The scene feels peaceful, yet he admits something simple. The storm frightened him. Not during the worst hours. Afterward, when he had time to consider what might have happened. The confession surprises you. Then it does not. Courage and fear have never been opposites. Most brave people seem perfectly familiar with both. A topic that still interests historians concerns how often emigrants concealed their worries from family members. Diaries sometimes reveal fears that never appeared in public conversations. The distinction makes sense. Leadership often involves projecting calm, even when uncertainty exists, especially when uncertainty exists. Back at the fire, others continue talking quietly. The children have fallen asleep. Several adults sit wrapped in blankets, watching the flames, thinking, resting. No one seems eager to end the evening, perhaps because movement will return soon. The trail will call again. Responsibilities will multiply. Tonight offers a rare pause between crisis and action. The mother begins mending a piece of clothing damaged during the storm. The task appears ordinary. That is precisely why it feels important. Ordinary activities signal recovery. Normal life reclaiming territory. One stitch at a time. One routine at a time. Hours drift by. The fire settles lower. More wood is added. The stars continue their slow movement overhead. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl calls briefly. Then silence returns. You find yourself thinking about the road ahead, the hidden trail, the distant mountains, Oregon itself. The destination remains far away, yet somehow it feels more real now. Every challenge overcome sharpens the image. A scholarly discussion that occasionally emerges in studies of westward migration concerns the role of hardship in shaping emigrant identity. Difficult experiences often strengthen commitment to the journey rather than weakening it. The people around you seem to embody that idea. The storm delayed them, tested them, exhausted them. It did not convince them to turn back. If anything, their determination appears stronger. Eventually, one by one, people leave the fire, blankets await, sleep awaits, another day awaits. You remain for a few moments longer, watching the final sparks drift upward. The longest night is not difficult because of weather. It is difficult because recovery requires honesty, because people finally acknowledge their fatigue, their worries, their relief, and as the last conversations fade into the cold, still air, and the camp settles into peaceful silence beneath a sky overflowing with stars, you realize something important. The storm tested wagons and ropes and fires, but it also tested patience, endurance, resolve. And tonight, despite the exhaustion lingering around every campfire, those things remain unbroken. Morning arrives bright, clear, and almost startlingly beautiful. For several seconds after waking, you simply lie still and stare upward. Blue sky. Actual blue sky. Not grey clouds. Not blowing snow. Not a ceiling of storm. Just open sky stretching endlessly above the valley. The sight feels like a reward. All around camp, people emerge from wagons and blankets with similar reactions. Faces lift toward the sunlight. Deep breaths fill cold lungs. Several travelers stand silently for a moment, appreciating something that would normally receive little attention. Good weather. One of the lessons repeatedly taught by frontier life is that ordinary comforts become extraordinary after hardship. The valley glitters beneath fresh snow. Every drift catches sunlight. Every tree branch sparkles with frost. The landscape looks less like a disaster zone and more like a painting, a very cold painting. The beauty does not erase reality. However, today is assessment day. The storm has ended. Now everyone must discover exactly what it left behind. A widely acknowledged fact about overland migration is that severe weather often created delays extending well beyond the storm itself. Recovery, repairs, and route finding frequently required as much effort as enduring the original event. You begin seeing evidence of that almost immediately. The father starts his inspection shortly after breakfast. You accompany him. Together you move around the wagon carefully, checking wheels, examining axles, inspecting ropes, testing fittings. The process is methodical. Nothing is rushed. The wagon survived. That much is obvious. The question now concerns condition rather than survival. Fortunately, the news appears encouraging. A few minor issues, some wear, some repairs needed. Nothing catastrophic. The father nods with quiet satisfaction. Nearby, other families conduct identical inspections. The camp resembles an enormous outdoor workshop. People crawl beneath wagons, examine equipment, replace damaged parts, sharpen tools, dry supplies. The sound of hammers occasionally echoes through the crisp air. Life is moving forward again. One neighbouring family discovers that a section of canvas suffered more damage than expected. Immediately, help arrives. Extra cloth appears. Needles emerge. Repairs begin. The scene feels familiar now. Cooperation has become one of the defining features of this wagon train. An unusual detail found in some emigrant journals reveals that wagon covers were sometimes patched so many times during long journeys that they became collections of repairs held together by determination and stitching. You glance at several nearby wagons. That description feels entirely believable. The morning continues. Snow melts slowly in sunny areas. Water drips from wagon edges. Tiny streams appear where none existed yesterday. The transformation seems almost magical. Nature spent days building a frozen world. Now it begins quietly dismantling it. You join a scouting party heading toward higher ground. The purpose is simple. Evaluate the route ahead. The climb proves easier than before. Snow remains deep, but clear weather improves visibility dramatically. At the summit, everyone pauses. The view is breathtaking. The valley stretches below. The wagon camp appears small against the vast landscape. Far beyond, ridges and hills emerge clearly for the first time since the storm arrived. Landmarks are returning. The world is becoming recognizable again. One traveler points toward a distant line of trees. Another identifies a bend in the creek. Gradually, pieces of the puzzle begin fitting together. The route west is still hidden in places, but it is no longer lost. Researchers continue examining how emigrants balanced caution and urgency after weather delays. Waiting too long carried risks. Moving too soon carried different risks. The decision required judgment rather than certainty. Standing on the ridge, you understand the challenge perfectly. The trail exists. The trail can likely be found. The question is when conditions become suitable for travel. Back in camp, news from the scouting parties spreads quickly. People listen attentively. Questions multiply. Answers remain cautious. Optimistic, but cautious. No one wants another unpleasant surprise. Lunch is eaten outdoors beneath bright sunshine. The contrast with previous days feels almost absurd. Children remove heavy outer layers. Adults sit comfortably near fires without huddling against wind. The storm already seems farther away than it truly is. Human memory works quickly. A delightful frontier curiosity concerns the surprising variety of items people carried west despite limited space. Among the stranger documented possessions were musical instruments, elaborate furniture pieces, and decorative plants. One traveler jokingly suggests that after surviving the blizzard, perhaps someone should have brought a piano after all. The laughter suggests widespread agreement. The afternoon becomes increasingly productive. Paths are cleared. Snowdrifts are reduced. Supplies are reorganized. The camp begins shedding its emergency appearance. You help free a wagon wheel partially trapped beneath packed snow. The work requires effort. Several people contribute. Eventually the wheel turns freely. The accomplishment receives a small cheer, not because it is dramatic, because morale enjoys victories of any size. The animals receive another round of inspections. Most appear healthy, tired perhaps, but healthy. Their resilience continues impressing everyone. The ox-called general remains particularly unconcerned by recent events. His primary interests appear to involve food and avoiding unnecessary excitement, a sensible philosophy. As afternoon drifts toward evening, conversations increasingly focus on departure. Not today. Probably not tomorrow morning. Soon. Very soon. The possibility energizes the camp. People straighten supplies, organize equipment, review plans. Movement has always been the natural state of a wagon train. Remaining stationary feels temporary, because it is. A question that still interests scholars is how much weather delays influenced emigrants' perceptions of distance. Time spent waiting often felt longer than time spent travelling, even when actual mileage remained unchanged. That observation seems accurate. The storm occupied only a portion of the journey, yet it feels enormous in memory. Perhaps because challenges leave deeper footprints than ordinary days. The sun slowly descends toward the western horizon. Long shadows stretch across the snow. The valley glows with warm colours: gold, amber, soft pink. The transformation is extraordinary. Several travellers stop working simply to admire the view. No one criticises them. Some moments deserve attention. You stand beside the family and look across the landscape. The storm's evidence remains everywhere: snowdrifts, buried ground, altered terrain. Yet the destruction many feared never arrived. The wagons remain, the people remain, the animals remain, the dream of Oregon remains. And as evening settles gently over the recovering camp and the final sunlight glitters across the snow-covered valley, you realize that today marks an important turning point. The blizzard is no longer the present, it has become the past. The next morning begins with a sound that has been absent for far too long: shoveling, scraping, digging. The noises echo across the valley almost immediately after sunrise. The wagon train has reached a collective conclusion. If the road west will not uncover itself, then people will start uncovering it. You step outside into clear, cold air. The sky shines bright blue. The snow reflects sunlight so intensely that it seems to glow from within. The beauty remains impressive. The workload remains considerable. Everywhere you look, people are moving. Not hurriedly, not desperately, purposefully. The camp has entered a new phase. Recovery is no longer about survival. Recovery is about progress. The father hands you a shovel, or rather, something that functions as a shovel. Frontier tools often blur the line between official equipment and creative interpretation. The assignment is simple: help clear the wagon. Several drifts have accumulated around the wheels and undercarriage. The snow must go. You begin working. Soon everyone around you is doing the same. Snow flies through the air, boots crunch, voices call back and forth. The valley has become remarkably busy. An established historical reality is that emigrants frequently performed extensive manual labor during trail delays. Clearing roads, repairing equipment, and improving campsites often required coordinated effort from entire wagon companies. This morning provides an excellent example. The wagon train resembles a construction project spread across snow-covered ground. Children participate as well. Their contributions vary significantly in effectiveness. Their enthusiasm remains beyond question. The youngest attacks a snowdrift with a stick. The snowdrift appears unimpressed. Still, nobody discourages him. Every great engineering achievement begins somewhere, nearby. Several travelers focus on creating paths between wagons. The routes become increasingly important as movement increases. A clear path saves time. A clear path prevents accidents. A clear path reduces the likelihood of unexpectedly discovering a snowbank with your face. The advantages are numerous. You spend part of the morning helping uncover wagon wheels. The work is repetitive. Dig, lift, throw, repeat. Yet there is something satisfying about it. Every shovelful reveals progress. Every cleared section looks better than before. Visible improvement can be surprisingly motivating. A little known but entertaining detail from frontier memoirs describes emigrants occasionally holding informal competitions during large work projects. Human beings seem genetically incapable of turning labor into anything other than a contest if given sufficient opportunity. Soon enough, friendly rivalry appears here as well. Which wagon can be freed first? Which path can be opened fastest? The competition remains good-natured. The results remain highly productive. Everyone wins, especially the wagons. By late morning, significant portions of the camp have changed dramatically. Snow still covers the valley, yet practical routes now connect important locations. The livestock areas become easier to reach. Supply wagons become more accessible. Movement feels natural again. The transformation lifts spirits noticeably. You accompany a small group working near the edge of camp. Their goal involves clearing a section of buried trail. At first glance, the task seems impossible. The original route lies hidden beneath layers of snow. Fortunately, memory helps. Landmarks help. Experience helps. Together, they begin reconstructing the road. Several travelers point toward familiar terrain features: a ridge, a tree cluster, a bend in the creek. Bit by bit, the trail reappears. Not visibly, mentally. Researchers continue studying the remarkable role of collective memory in frontier navigation. Before modern mapping technologies became widespread, people often relied upon shared observation and accumulated experience to interpret landscapes. Watching the process unfold feels fascinating. The trail exists first in people's minds, then it gradually returns to the ground. Around midday, the sun warms the valley slightly. Tiny drops of water fall from wagon edges. Snow softens. The work becomes messier. Boots collect slush. Clothing gathers moisture. Nobody complains. Warmth creates new challenges, but they are preferable to blizzard conditions. A traveller nearby remarks that he would gladly choose muddy boots over another storm. No one argues. Lunch is eaten quickly. There's too much momentum to stop for long. The camp has rediscovered its purpose. People want to move. The road west is beginning to call again. One delightful frontier anecdote tells of emigrants occasionally becoming so eager to resume travel after weather delays that they packed wagons before conditions truly allowed departure. Patience remained a necessary skill. Excitement did not always improve judgment. You see a similar energy building here. Families discuss timelines constantly. Tomorrow, the next day soon, very soon. The exact answer remains uncertain. The desire remains universal. The afternoon brings further successes. Several heavily buried wagons are completely uncovered. Additional sections of trail are identified. Equipment repairs continue. The camp feels increasingly organized. Every completed task strengthens confidence. Every improvement makes departure seem more realistic. The animals appear pleased by the activity as well, or perhaps they simply appreciate the extra attention and improved access to food. Either interpretation seems reasonable. General the ox continues displaying extraordinary commitment to simplicity. Eat, rest, stand quietly, repeat. His approach to life possesses undeniable elegance. A topic still discussed by historians concerns how wagon companies balanced individual initiative with group coordination. Too much independence could create confusion. Too much central control could slow decision-making. This camp appears to have found a practical middle ground. People identify problems. People solve problems. Information flows naturally between families. No elaborate system is required. As afternoon fades, the valley begins revealing signs of normal life. Children resume games. Laundry appears drying in sunlight. Conversations shift away from storms and toward future plans. The emotional atmosphere changes almost as much as the physical environment. The blizzard is losing its central place in everyone's thoughts, not forgotten, simply shrinking. Evening approaches beneath a clear sky. The work finally slows. Tools are set aside. Fires are lit. People gather once more. This time, however, the mood feels different. Lighter, more optimistic. The camp no longer resembles a community recovering from disaster. It resembles a community preparing for departure. You stand near the edge of the valley and look across the snow. Paths now crisscross the landscape. Wagons stand ready. The trail is beginning to emerge. The road west is returning, and as the final sunlight touches the hills and the camp settles into another peaceful evening, you realize that the hardest part of recovery may already be finished. The storm buried the journey. The people have started digging it back out. The morning finally arrives with a feeling that has been absent for a long time. Movement. Real movement. Not people walking round camp, not shoveling, not repairing. Travel. The kind of movement the Oregon Trail was built for. You wake before sunrise and immediately sense the difference. The camp feels alive. Purpose hums through the cold morning air. Fires burn early. Voices carry across the valley. Wagons are being loaded. Harnesses are being checked. Animals are being prepared. The long pause is ending. You step outside and watch the eastern horizon brighten. Snow still covers much of the landscape. The valley remains transformed by the storm, yet pathways now connect the camp. Wheels are visible. Routes have been cleared. The trail west has begun revealing itself. Not perfectly, not completely. Enough. The father is already working. He moves from task to task with practiced efficiency. One final inspection of supplies, one final check of the wagon, one final review of harness equipment. The mother organizes blankets and provisions. The children bounce between excitement and impatience. The youngest has asked if they are leaving approximately 17 times before breakfast. You admire his consistency. A firmly established fact of Oregon Trail travel is that departures often began very early in the morning. Cooler temperatures benefited animals, and maximizing daylight hours remained important throughout the journey. Today, no one needs encouragement. Everyone wants to get moving. The valley that provided shelter during the storm has become something else, a place to leave, not because it is unpleasant, because the journey continues. You help load several remaining items. The work feels strangely satisfying. Every object returned to its proper place represents progress. Every secured crate represents intention. The wagon is becoming a vehicle again rather than a shelter. Around the camp, similar transformations occur. Families dismantle temporary arrangements. Extra windbreaks are removed. Snow tools are stored. Emergency solutions quietly disappear. The signs of survival give way to the routines of travel. The transition feels symbolic. The storm chapter is closing. A delightful frontier curiosity appears in some trail journals. Travelers occasionally became so attached to particular campsites that they gave them informal names before departing. You suspect this valley might have earned one. Perhaps Snow Valley, perhaps General's Ridge, in honor of the famously untroubled ox. The possibilities are endless. At last, the animals are brought into position. Harnesses tighten. Chains rattle softly. People gather near their wagons. The atmosphere feels almost ceremonial, not because anyone planned a ceremony, because departures naturally carry emotional weight. Several families glance around the valley one final time. The place challenged them, protected them, delayed them, saved them. Relationships with landscapes can become surprisingly complicated. The father climbs into position, the oxen lean forward, the wagon shifts, moves, then rolls. A simple action, an enormously important action. The Oregon Trail is moving again. One by one, other wagons follow. Wood creaks, wheels turn, boots crunch through packed snow. The familiar sounds return. For the first time in many days, the wagon train resembles itself again. You walk beside the family as the procession leaves the valley. The pace remains slow. Snow still complicates travel, yet nobody seems bothered. Forward progress changes everything. Even difficult miles feel encouraging when they are actual miles. The trail itself appears imperfect. Sections remain hidden. Others have been identified through careful observation. Travelers rely upon landmarks reconstructed during previous scouting efforts. A ridge here, a creek there, a distant stand of trees. The route emerges gradually from memory and experience. Researchers continue exploring how emigrants navigated uncertain terrain before modern mapping systems became widespread. Practical observation, collective knowledge, and environmental awareness often mattered as much as formal maps. Watching the wagon train move, you understand why. The road exists partly on the ground and partly in people's minds. The morning passes pleasantly. Sunlight glitters across snowfields. The air remains cold but manageable. The animals settle into a comfortable rhythm. Even the children seem calmer. Movement has restored normality. The world once again makes sense. Travel west. Camp. Travel again. The familiar pattern returns. At midday, the wagon train pauses briefly. People stretch. Animals rest. Food is distributed. The stop feels different from storm delays. Temporary. Intentional. Everyone knows they will soon continue. One older emigrant remarks that he had almost forgotten how much he enjoyed walking. Several companions respond with deep skepticism. His statement is immediately questioned. The debate becomes one of the most entertaining events of the afternoon. A small historical oddity found in personal accounts involves travellers keeping informal tallies of memorable events. River crossings, broken wagon wheels, unusual wildlife sightings, and weather incidents all became part of the journey's growing collection of stories. The recent blizzard has certainly earned a place on that list, perhaps near the top. The afternoon route carries the wagon train through a landscape transformed by snow and sunlight. Frozen fields shimmer. Distant hills glow softly. Animal tracks cross open areas. Evidence of life appears everywhere. The wilderness seems awake again. You notice something interesting. People are looking outward now. During the storm, attention focused inward, on survival, on immediate needs. Today eyes return to the horizon, to distant ridges, to future destinations. The shift feels important. Hope generally prefers looking ahead. Several scouting riders return during the afternoon carrying encouraging reports. Conditions farther west appear manageable. Additional sections of trail have been identified. The news spreads quickly. Morale rises even higher. A question that scholars occasionally examine concerns how information circulated within wagon trains. News often travelled rapidly through informal conversations, shaping decisions and expectations long before any official confirmation existed. You watch that process unfold in real time. One conversation becomes three become 10. Soon the entire wagon train knows the latest reports. By late afternoon, the miles begin accumulating. Not huge distances, respectable distances. Enough to feel meaningful, enough to remind everyone why they came. The valley of the storm gradually disappears behind the wagon train. First it shrinks, then it fades. Eventually it becomes another memory carried west. You glance back one final time. The place looks peaceful beneath the afternoon sun, almost innocent. The landscape gives no indication of the blizzard it recently unleashed. Nature rarely leaves explanatory notes. As evening approaches, a new campsite is selected. The wagons circle loosely. Fires appear, animals settle. The familiar rhythm resumes as though it never left. Yet something has changed. The people are not quite the same as they were before the storm. They are more experienced, more connected, more confident, and as the first firelight flickers across the new camp and the wagon train settles comfortably into the routines of travel once again, you realize that the journey west has officially resumed. The road is open, the wheels are turning, Oregon is waiting. The storm gradually becomes a story, not immediately, not all at once. But with each mile travelled west, the blizzard loses a little of its immediacy and gains a little more shape in memory. The wagon train continues moving beneath clear skies. Snow still appears in sheltered places. Cold mornings remain common, yet the crisis has passed. People have enough distance now to begin considering what they learned from it. You walk beside the family as the trail winds through rolling country. The rhythm of travel feels familiar again. Boots strike the earth. Wheels rumble softly. Oxen move with patient determination. The landscape unfolds steadily ahead. For the first time in many days, conversation centers less on weather and more on reflection. The father begins the discussion. He remarks that one extra bundle of rope proved surprisingly useful. The mother points out that dry blankets became more valuable than almost anything else in the wagon. The children contribute observations of their own. The youngest announces that every future campsite should include a snow fort. The recommendation receives mixed reviews. As the morning progresses, similar conversations occur throughout the wagon train. People compare experiences, evaluate decisions, discuss mistakes, celebrate successes. Hardship often becomes a teacher once it stops being a threat. One of the clearest truths preserved in Oregon Trail records is that emigrants constantly adapted their plans based on experience. The journey west rewarded flexibility far more than rigid expectations. The storm provided a powerful lesson in exactly that principle. No family could control the weather. They could control preparation, cooperation, response. Those choices mattered. You notice how many wagons now carry supplies differently than before. Important items have been moved. Emergency materials are easier to reach. Tools occupy more practical locations. The storm reorganized not only camps but habits. A fascinating frontier tidbit appears occasionally in emigrant memoirs. Some travelers reportedly developed superstitions about certain objects after difficult events. A particular rope, blanket, or tool might gain an almost legendary reputation simply because it proved useful during a crisis. You can imagine several items in this wagon earning similar status. That blanket that stayed dry, that rope that held, that fire starter that worked when everything else seemed frozen. Objects become stories surprisingly quickly. The trail stretches onward beneath a pale blue sky. The weather remains cool but pleasant. The landscape feels larger again. During the storm, the world shrank to a few yards around the wagon. Now the horizon returns. Distant hills, open valleys, endless western skies. Freedom of movement restores freedom of thought. Researchers studying frontier migrations often emphasize how environmental challenges shape decision-making. Severe weather events frequently influenced future behavior long after conditions improved. You can already see that influence. People watch the sky more carefully now. Camp preparation begins earlier. Potential shelter receives greater attention. Experience has sharpened awareness, not fear. Awareness. There is a difference. Around midday, the wagon train pauses near a stream. The stop provides an opportunity for rest. Animals drink. People eat. Conversations continue. One older emigrant describes storms experienced decades earlier. Another argues that every generation believes its weather was worse. The debate becomes surprisingly spirited. No conclusion is reached. Weather arguments seem remarkably resistant to resolution across centuries. Nearby, the children skip stones across shallow water. Their lives have already moved beyond the blizzard. Children often possess that advantage. They carry memories without becoming trapped inside them. The adults seem to appreciate the example. The afternoon journey feels peaceful. Sunlight glimmers across patches of remaining snow. Birds appear more frequently. Signs of seasonal change emerge everywhere. Winter remains present, yet hints of transition are visible too. Nature rarely stays still for long. A charming story circulating through the wagon train concerns General the Ox. Apparently another family has begun comparing difficult travelers to him. The comparison is considered highly complimentary. General's reputation for calm endurance has expanded considerably. The animal remains blissfully unaware of his growing fame. Some academic discussions surrounding overland migration focus on resilience. Not resilience as an abstract concept, but resilience as a collection of practical behaviours: preparation, adaptation, cooperation, persistence. Looking round the wagon train, those qualities become easy to identify. No dramatic speeches are required. No grand declarations. People simply continue. They repair, adjust, learn, move forward. The lessons of the storm reveal themselves in ordinary actions: a tighter knot, a better campsite choice, an extra bundle of fuel. Knowledge rarely arrives in a more useful form. As evening approaches, the wagon train settles into another camp. The process now feels almost effortless, not because conditions are easy, because experience has accumulated. Every family knows the routine. Every task flows naturally into the next. The fire is lit. The animals are tended. Dinner begins. The familiar pattern continues, yet the atmosphere remains reflective. You sit beside the flames while people discuss Oregon itself, the destination, the dream, the reason they started this journey. The conversation carries a different tone now. It's more grounded, less idealized. The storm reminded everyone that reaching Oregon involves more than hope. It requires endurance. One traveler remarks that surviving difficult weather makes the destination feel more meaningful. Several others agree. Achievements often gain value from the effort required to reach them. The stars emerge overhead. The air cools. The fire crackles softly. Somewhere nearby, laughter drifts through the darkness. The sound feels relaxed, comfortable. And a question that continues to interest historians is whether emigrants fully understood the scale of what they were accomplishing while they were doing it. Many accounts suggest they focused primarily on daily tasks rather than historical significance. That seems entirely plausible. People rarely feel like historical figures while fixing wagon wheels or drying wet blankets. They feel like people solving problems. Yet those ordinary efforts become history. You stare into the fire and think about the valley where the storm trapped the wagon train. Already it feels distant. The details remain vivid, the emotions less so. Memory is beginning its quiet work, smoothing edges, organizing events, turning experience into narrative. And as the camp settles into peaceful silence beneath a sky filled with stars, you realize that the greatest lesson of the blizzard may not involve weather at all. It may involve the simple discovery that people are often stronger, wiser, and more adaptable than they know until circumstances require them to find out. The road west continues beneath a sky that finally seems willing to cooperate. Day after day, the wagon train advances. The snow becomes less dominant. The trail becomes more familiar. The memory of the blizzard remains vivid. Yet it no longer occupies every conversation. Life on the Oregon Trail possesses a remarkable ability to pull attention forward. There is always another hill, another river, another campsite, another mile. You walk beside the family during one of those bright, cold mornings that seem to define the western frontier. Sunlight spreads across the landscape. The oxen move steadily. Wheels roll through frozen ground. The familiar rhythm of migration has fully returned. Yet something has changed. Not the trail, not the weather. The travellers themselves. You notice it in small ways. People prepare camps more efficiently. Families organize supplies with greater care. The sky receives more attention. Potential shelter receives quicker evaluation. Lessons learned during the storm remain present even when nobody discusses them directly. They have become habits, and habits travel well. A broadly recognized historical truth is that many emigrants who reached Oregon successfully did so not because conditions were easy, but because they continually adapted to changing circumstances throughout the journey. Adaptation has become the defining skill of this wagon train. The storm simply revealed it. The children seem different too, more confident. The youngest still possesses limitless curiosity. Of course, some qualities remain immune to experience, yet even he carries himself differently. The blizzard has become part of his personal mythology, a great adventure, a tremendous battle against snow, a story he will probably improve with every future retelling. Children often understand memory as an opportunity rather than a responsibility. There is wisdom in that. The days continue passing. Gradually, signs of Oregon begin feeling closer, not visible yet, not tangible, but imaginable. The destination no longer exists only in stories. It feels reachable. One traveler remarks that the journey finally seems real. Another replies that the journey has always been real. Only the ending felt distant. The distinction sparks an interesting discussion. Several families contribute their thoughts. The conversation lasts most of the afternoon. A curious frontier anecdote preserved in later recollections describes emigrants occasionally arguing about what they plan to do first upon reaching Oregon. Sleep, build, plant, explore. The answers varied widely, though resting appeared frequently. That answer receives strong support around this camp as well. The father votes for building, the mother votes for unpacking. The children vote for everything simultaneously. The debate remains unresolved. As many important debates do, the landscape unfolds steadily around you. Valleys, ridges, open country. The west continues revealing itself 1 mile at a time. You find yourself reflecting on the valley where the blizzard trapped the wagon train. The place already feels distant, not forgotten, integrated, part of the larger journey. The storm no longer stands alone in memory. It has joined the river crossings, the campfires, the endless walking, the stars above the prairie, all the countless moments that together form the migration west. Researchers continue examining how emigrants remember difficult experiences later in life. Many accounts reveal something interesting. Hardships often became central memories not because people enjoyed them, but because they revealed character, community, and resilience. That pattern feels entirely understandable. The storm taught practical lessons. It also revealed deeper truths. Who helped others? Who stayed calm? Who adapted quickly? Who shared what they had? Character often becomes most visible during difficult weather. One evening, the wagon train camps beside a stream bordered by cottonwoods. The scene feels oddly familiar, not identical to earlier camps, similar enough to inspire reflection. The fire crackles softly, coffee steams, children laugh nearby. The father sits quietly watching the flames. Eventually he speaks, not about Oregon, not about weather, about gratitude. Gratitude that everyone came through the storm safely. Gratitude for neighbors. Gratitude for sturdy animals. Gratitude for simple luck. The comment receives quiet agreement. History often celebrates dramatic achievements. Yet survival frequently depends upon humble things. A strong rope, a shared meal, a helping hand, a fortunate campsite. Some scholars still debate which factors most influence successful migration across the American West. Resources mattered, planning mattered, experience mattered. Yet personal accounts repeatedly highlight cooperation as an equally important ingredient. Looking around the campfire, that conclusion seems difficult to challenge. No family survived entirely alone. The stars emerge overhead, bright, clear, endless, much like the first stars you saw weeks ago beside another campfire far back along the trail. The journey has changed since then. The people have changed. You have changed. The road continues. The destination waits, and slowly, almost without noticing. The story begins settling into memory. You remember the drifting ash from distant fires, the endless prairie, the warnings from travelers, the first snowflakes, the roaring wind, the buried trail, the long nights, the recovery, the return to movement. Each memory flows naturally into the next, like wagon tracks stretching across the continent, like rivers joining larger rivers, like stories passed from one generation to another. The fire burns lower. The camp grows quieter. Families retreat to blankets and wagons. Animals rest nearby. The stream murmurs softly through darkness. You sit for a while longer, watching the final sparks rise toward the stars. And now, as the journey continues westward beyond the edges of this story, the pace begins to slow. The night feels calm. The air feels gentle. The road behind seems long. The road ahead seems promising. You no longer hear the storm, only the memory of it, a distant echo softened by time. The firelight flickers quietly across sleeping wagons. The oxen stand peacefully beneath the stars. The cottonwoods sway almost imperceptibly in the cool night air. Far above, countless stars shine over the Oregon Trail just as they have for centuries. You imagine the wagon train resting safely beneath them, the children asleep, the parents finally relaxed, the animals content, the difficult weather behind them, the future before them. And as the night deepens, everything grows softer, the sounds, the thoughts, the memories. The trail stretches west beneath moonlight, silent, patient, endless. You let the image settle comfortably in your mind, the wagons at rest, the fire fading to glowing embers, the stars keeping watch overhead, the cold air gentle now rather than threatening, the journey continuing steadily onward through the darkness. No hurry, no worry. Only the quiet certainty of people moving toward tomorrow 1 mile at a time. The storm is past. The lesson remains. The road continues. And somewhere beyond the horizon, Oregon waits beneath the same peaceful sky. Sweet dreams.